down, you faker!
Faker? You're comparing yourself to me? Huh? You're not even good enough to be
I'll
my
make you eat those words!
The saying goes that everyone on Earth has a duplicate of themselves somewhere. But that's not entirely accurate. Sometimes it's just a simple quirk of genetics, sometimes it's wishful thinking drawing non-existent comparisons, sometimes you discover an uncomfortable family secret. Sometimes it's just me, following you home, standing outside your window as I watch you sleep at night while I rummage through your garbage. But what would happen if you were the unfortunate one to find a perfect copy of yourself in the world? What if you came face to face with an exact mirror of everything you are, and no way to tell which side is the reflection? Welcome back to Unraveling, the series where we dissect and analyze the infamous events of years past, and try to figure out just what exactly is even going on in them. This is part 3 of our ongoing dive into the infamous Clone Saga, and I hope you're excited because it's finally time to get into the infamous saga in full. When we last checked in, we just got done going over the stories filling in the events between the two sagas, from Spidey dealing with the wrathful wraith Carrion, to discovering he's got a particularly uncomfortable stalker. Though we've been left off in a rather awkward position, as we concluded last time with the revelation that the Jackal was actually a fraud. Neither Gwen Stacy nor Spider-Man were ever truly clones, but rather innocent bystanders genetically altered by the mad Jackal to deceive the wall-crawler. So none of the original saga actually matters then, right? The clones were fake, so logically that first story shouldn't affect this new saga in any way. Oh, Johnny. Oh, no. Oh, no, 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 no. You misunderstood. So before we dive headfirst without a life jacket, let's take a moment to reestablish some things. First, we're going through the Clone Saga in the order it was published back in the day, rather than the official reading order. As I said before, this is due to Marvel's official order placing several stories prior to ongoing events in the main books of the saga, which will create continuity issues for us as quite frequently they'll reveal information we won't learn until much later unless we follow the publication timeline. That being said, I am making a few minor alterations here and there, mostly for my own sanity. And on that topic, that brings us to the second point. The Clone Saga was primarily told across the 4 core Spider books in publication during the 1990s. These were Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, Web of Spider-Man, and the plainly titled Spider-Man, commonly referred to by fans as Adjectiveless Spider-Man. To make my life a bit easier from this point forward, I'll be referring to the titles by their abbreviations. ASM, SSM, Web, and AdSM, so try to remember which one is which, cause I won't be reminding you. Third, we'll be going deeper into the behind the scenes of the saga this time than we did before. Much of this behind the scenes info comes from the blog Life of Reilly. Written in 2006 by Andrew Galetz and Marvel writer Glenn Greenberg, The Life of Reilly was a blog series that recapped the Clone Saga from start to finish. Though that blog doesn't go as in-depth into the saga as I am, it is a fantastic read, and I highly recommend it, but the main draw comes from commentary by Greenberg and interviews provided by the creative team at Marvel involved with the Clone Saga, with such figures as Tom DeFalco and Mark Bernardo, among others, providing insight into creative decisions made at the time, and explaining why certain things occur the way they do. I'll mostly be paraphrasing this commentary, as I think you should read the blog itself for the whole experience, but I'll try not to leave anything important on the table. Lastly, the Clone Saga doesn't really abide by the typical 3-act structure most stories tend to follow, really comprised more of about 5 or even 6 acts depending on how you divide things, and the official read order doesn't have definitive markers for where the acts end. For this series, I'll be doing my best to consolidate the saga into 3 distinct acts of my own, with this video consisting of what I'm considering Act 1, though I'll point out where the story concludes its respective arcs as we go. Now, all our major housekeeping might be sorted through, but we're still not quite ready to start the saga proper. There's still one more thing we have to go over before we get there. From our perspective, it's been about 19 years between the release of the 2 Clone Sagas, but in comic book time, it's only been 5 years. And what a busy 5 years our wall-crawling menace has had. His personal life has been rocky, but things are looking up for Petey Boy. He's been getting plenty of recognition for his work, even getting a book published. And though not wealthy, he's financially stable for the first time in his life. His love life wouldn't be so smooth, however, but then again, when has it ever been? Though things were starting off well with Mary Jane last time we saw them, they wouldn't stay that way, and MJ would dump Peter after being spurned by crime-fighting one too many times. While they'd return to being friends, Mary Jane would leave New York altogether shortly after, leading to Peter going through a long series of semi-casual on-and-off romances, most notably with the Black Cat. But MJ would eventually return to New York, on a somewhat permanent basis, and things between them would change forever, when Mary Jane reveals she knows Peter is Spider-Man. While the revelation would initially cause strife between the two, they'd quickly overcome it, rebuilding and rekindling their long-dormant relationship stronger than ever, resulting in their now iconic marriage, which is definitely still canon and has never been tampered with or undone in any way, shape, or form. But in terms of his other career, Spidey's had quite the productive time. He's dealt with the menace of the mysterious Hobgoblin, became Captain Universe for a little while, joined the new Fantastic Four, and most famously, Spidey fought in the Secret Wars, where Earth's greatest heroes and villains, and also Galactus for some fucking reason, were summoned to the bizarre alien battle world to fight for the amusement of the almighty Beyonder, which of course led to the now iconic Alien Suit Saga, culminating in the introduction of Venom. And speaking of Venom, his rogues gallery has had quite a shakeup too all across the board. We've seen the introduction of brand new foes, Tombstone, the Puma, Vermin, and more. And we've also lost villains too. Some positively, like Sandman reforming and becoming a hero, or Black Cat's whole, well, everything, but also in more tragic ways, like with the death of Kraven the Hunter and Harry Osborn. But the biggest change, and most essential to our story, was given to us at the conclusion of ASM 365, with the sudden reappearance of Richard and Mary Parker, Peter's biological parents. Peter's parents, and the circumstances surrounding them, aren't exactly the most common points of info for Spider-Man fans. Though it's been established knowledge for quite some time, it doesn't get brought up all that often, and all but a small handful of adaptations have ever actually explained what happened to them, and even then, the only one with much accuracy was the 90s cartoon. So, let me give you the quick version. The circumstances of Peter's parents were first revealed in the 5th annual issue of ASM way back in 1968. The story would center around Peter finding a newspaper clipping reporting their deaths, which brands them as terrorists, sending our wall crawler off to figure out the truth personally. Over the course of the story, we'd learn the reality. Peter's parents were actually secret agents for the CIA, who would travel to Algeria to go undercover in a terrorist organization run by the Red Skull, who would— No, not that Red Skull, it's the other Red Skull. No, not that Red Skull either. The other one. No, not that the commie one. That's the spice. Anyways, Red Skull figured out their identities and had them assassinated, forging evidence to hide their government connections and get them branded as traitors, basically just to be a dick. Though fortunately the story would end happily, with Spidey stopping the Skull and finding evidence to exonerate his parents, albeit posthumously. That was, at least, until their sudden return, where they'd reveal their deaths were actually a ruse, claiming that before the plane crashed, they were apprehended by the KGB, looking for info on the Skull's organization. The bodies found in the crash belonging to 2 of the agents, while they were held prisoner in a Soviet gulag until just recently. Peter's parents would stick around in the books for a while, up until ASM 388, where we'd discover this was yet another deception. Richard and Mary were in reality imposters, killer robotic duplicates known as simulacra, which are a totally original, unique concept from life model decoys in several ways, with examples such as... Anyways, the whole affair would send Spidey into a frenzy, tearing across the city to find out what sick bastard would dare to stoop to such despicable depths to torment him. And he'd find out quickly, learning that the man behind the machines was none other than his longtime foe, the Chameleon, constructing the simulacra for the purpose of... Actually, why did the Chameleon do it? This is going to sound ridiculous, so just bear with me for a minute. This might seem like a totally irrelevant plot point to the saga, but it really isn't. The situation with Peter's parents and the resulting fallout is the major inciting incident for the Clone Saga even happening, and hardly anyone ever talks about it. I've seen dozens of discussions about the saga in dozens of formats. podcasts, blogs, mid-tier angry YouTube reviewers, video essays, smoke signals, all but a small few ever discuss this event as it relates to the story. And even of that small few, the motivation behind it all is never even remotely alluded to. In fact, if you take these at face value, you'd be led to assume that the chameleon did it for absolutely no goddamn reason whatsoever. And it's this single event that's the reason why I'm doing this series. There's so much absolute nonsense that happens during the Clone Saga that so many people only barely scratch the surface, taking the story as it is on the cover and never giving it any deeper look. Its own reputation is built on what is essentially secondhand knowledge, and I don't think that's fair. The Clone Saga is fucking stupid, and if you're gonna talk shit about it, you might as well give 110%. In actuality, the chameleon is only the middleman in this, having built the simulacra at the behest of, who else? The Green Goblin. Having engineered the scheme before his death, the Goblin taunts Spider-Man from beyond the grave, one final cruel prank to make the wall crawler suffer. The compounding grief from the sudden return, then removal of his parents, as well as the specter of the Goblin rearing its ugly head to ruin the poignant final moments of his former friend, these would all drive Spidey into utter madness, discarding his humanity to become a pure weapon of vengeance, abandoning his family and friends in an effort to dispose of the man under the mask to live solely as the Spider. This would have unforeseen consequences for the Spider, however. Peter's withdrawal from humanity, on top of everything else going on, would cause great strife for his loved ones, chief among them being Aunt May, who, after a particularly intense fight with Mary Jane, would suffer a massive heart attack, the worst of her life yet, rendering her comatose and hospitalized, hanging at death's door. And it is here, true believers, that we finally find the stage ready for our sensational saga to begin. And trust me, if you don't already know what you're in store for, you have no way of guessing what's coming next. Officially, the Clone Saga will begin in Web 117, but we would first start getting early teases of it 3 issues prior, when Aunt May receives a phone call from a mysterious friend somewhere out in the countryside. We don't know when or how they began talking, but Aunt May's been talking to them for quite some time, and has always wanted to meet them. Her friend, however, believes something's going wrong with the Parker family, and after learning of Aunt May's heart attack, he sets off on a mad dash for New York, hoping to see her in person before the worst comes to pass. The stranger's quest to New York would play out over the course of several issues of the main 4 books, every issue showing the next steps of his journey, making a couple of sightseeing trips on the way and getting involved with local affairs, all the while desperately trying to avoid running into the Parkers on his way to meet with May. But the stranger's quest would conclude at SSM 216, during an otherwise unrelated story about Spider-Man chasing after the Scorpion. It's weird how both Clone Sagas start with stories where Spidey's fighting the Scorpion while Aunt May is in the hospital. We'd end our issue off with Peter finally going to visit Aunt May in the hospital, having been putting it off for some time as part of the whole abandoning humanity thing, looking to finally find a place to hang his head and let out the grievances the world's been throwing his way. That is, until one of the nurses point out a rather alarming sight for Peter. Spider-Man, swinging across the city streets. Peter, alarmed by Spidey's presence, bolts for the rooftop, only to find himself face to face with, well, himself. The reveal of May's mystery friend being the clone is not exactly the most shocking twist. Most longtime fans had figured out the stranger's identity from minute 1, and the teases we see are so plainly obviously meant to connect to Peter that the only way you wouldn't have figured it out is if you'd never knew there was a Spider clone, or for that matter, never read a single Spider-Man comic in your life. Despite that, the Spider offices tried their best to keep the reveal a secret, the identity of the mystery man being on a strictly need-to-know basis, even internally, with a very small handful of people outside of the group being privy to the truth. Though the effort was somewhat wasted, as Marvel's official publishing plan, a solicitation guidebook sent out to retailers detailing the books coming out in the latter half of 1994 would reveal the Mystery Man's identity months in advance, which inevitably spread to the general reader base. But even then, the guidebook itself was largely uninformed, only giving the simplest idea of what would be coming. Regardless, though the full scope of the saga was yet to be seen, the big secret was finally out to the world. Peter's clone has returned at one of his lowest points in life, and in a rare moment of honesty, the editor's note proudly proclaims, nothing will ever be the same for the wall crawler. And boy howdy, did they not realize how true this would be. But I suppose now that we're actually in the Clone Saga, I should actually explain the most important detail regarding it. Namely, why did Marvel start the Clone Saga? Well, it all goes back to the previous year in the world next door, where our distinguished competition had some big things cooking. Across 1993, DC had 2 different major storylines running throughout the year. both featuring the same basic skeletal structure, focusing on their two biggest characters. These stories were The Death of Superman and Nightfall. Both stories follow the same overall formula, wherein our mighty heroes are forcibly removed from their roles by a great threat, thus necessitating a replacement to come in and take up the now vacant mantles, only for said replacements to fail to live up to the expectations of the role, and resulting in the originals returning to once more take their rightful places. With Death of Superman focusing on, well, the death of Superman, obviously, falling at the hands of the monster Doomsday, resulting in a group of 4 new Supermen, all vying to claim the role of the one true Man of Steel, only for things to go out of hand and the real Superman returning from the grave to make things right. Meanwhile, Nightfall's story revolved around Batman's first battle against the psychotic machinations of Bane, engineering the largest crime spree in Gotham's history, all for the sake of accomplishing what no other villain could, vying to mentally, spiritually, and eventually, literally, break the Bat, crippling Bruce Wayne and resulting in his replacement by the young Jean-Paul Valley, previously the vigilante Azrael, who quickly found himself in over his head as the Bat and going mad with power, forcing Bruce to come back out of retirement to stop both Bane as well as his corrupted protege. Both stories were massive critical hits for DC. While most savvy fans knew it would never last, the idea of DC outright killing and replacing their two most iconic characters after decades of popularity was entirely unexpected to more casual fans and put a huge spotlight on the company, to the point where even mainstream news reporters were talking about it. It gave DC a massive boost in attention and forever cemented the two stories as iconic hallmarks of their mythos. And of course, and more importantly to Marvel as well, they made an absolute fuck ton of money. Marvel, never one to be ashamed of blatantly stealing ideas, quickly hopped on the bandwagon and passed the order on down to make their own version of it with their own most popular character, Spider-Man. Though the idea of temporary continuity shakeups wasn't a foreign concept to Marvel, they had never attempted something to the scale of this beforehand, and the Spider Office worked tirelessly to craft an intricate, complex narrative meticulously plotted months in advance to create the perfect storyline. Is what I'd like to say happened, but the reality is pretty far off. According to Mark Bernardo, the Clone Saga was initially suggested by Terry Kavanagh, who had impulsively introduced the idea to the Spider Office during a staff meeting to brainstorm ideas. The concept was initially met with derision by the crew, until one writer, purported to be J.M. DeMatteis, saw potential in the idea, slowly winning over the other writers on staff. The concept remained divisive between creative and editorial, even initially being vetoed by Tom DeFalco, but eventually he too would be swayed to its potential and put it into motion, even throwing his name into the ring to write for the story. In hindsight, perhaps this is the real reason they kept the Clone Saga such a tight-lipped secret, not to make it a big surprise, but to avoid having to convince more people that it had potential. Whatever the case may be, the Clone Saga is on, and there's no stopping this train for now. Our saga would begin in full with the story Power and Responsibility, a 4-part plotline spread across the 4 titles. On the flip side of each book, literally, as in you had to physically flip the book upside down and read from the back, the first of many wretched gimmicks we'll see, was the backup story Birth of a Spider-Man, detailing the origin of the clone from the moment of his birth to the aftermath of the final battle against the Jackal. Largely serving as a recap of the original saga from the clone's perspective, this story is meant more for new readers not already familiar with the clone, and with that, there's not all that much for us to focus on. However, there are a few key points to discuss. First and foremost being that we are just straight up ignoring what the High Evolutionary said right now because fuck having to resolve that plot point. But more predominantly, we see that Peter's hypothesis on the clone from back then wasn't entirely spot on, as we see the Jackal working meticulously to ensure his clone is the absolute most perfect copy he can make, right down to his very emotions. What matters the most right now, though, comes at the very end, where we'd find out how the clone is still hanging around. Picking up where the original saga ended, with the Jackal's death and Peter disposing of the clone, we'd learn that the clone wasn't actually dead, having survived the explosive finale, battered but breathing. Waking up several days later on the roof of the incineration plant, because I guess Spidey just fucking missed the smokestack, the clone would set off into the night, attempting to track down the Jackal in order to ensure he's done for as an ever-growing sense of panic washes over him. But his search is cut short after a quick stop at home, where he finds himself face-to-face with his own mirror image spending the night with Mary Jane. The shock immediately sets in on the clone, coming to realize the facts he himself denied, driving him into a spiral of despair, with the flashback ending with the clone miserable and alone in the city streets below the warmth he was denied, left only with his sorrow to contemplate his false reality in the torrential rain. Exactly where the clone's life went between then and now is, as of yet, a mystery, but we'll get to it later for sure. Until then, we're jumping from the past back into the present with Web 117, and the second showdown between the twins, and Peter, as usual, is taking it pretty well. Spidey and his clone engage in a mad chase across the rooftops, with Spidey madly accusing his copy of a myriad of different schemes, but it takes a nice close-up in the mirror for him to realize the truth staring right at him. His very own clone, the Jackal's mad creation, has returned once more. While all of this is going on, strange things are underfoot at Ravencroft Hospital, where Dr. Kafka has temporarily passed control of the facility onto another doctor. Our first of many all-powerful mystery villains, Judas Traveler. Traveler, alongside his band of assistants he's christened the Host, Chakra, Medea, Mr. Noct, and the Postal Dude?
What fucking moron designed this?
Anyways, Traveler and his crew immediately seize total control over Ravencroft, seeking to use the asylum and its occupants as subjects for his mad experiments. Seeking to comprehend the true nature of the human mind and its capacity for evil, Traveler has chosen Ravencroft and the supervillains within as his test subjects. And when he realizes the one running theme of hate and madness amongst the many villains that call the hospital home, he focuses his attention on a single source, Spider-Man. Spidey wakes up sometime after his encounter with the clone, having gotten a nice taste of cement served up to him, and coming to just in time to receive a psychic summons by Traveler's aid. Chakra gives the wall crawler the score. Traveler is holding the inmates of Ravencroft hostage, and he's prepared to kill each and every one of them unless Spider-Man comes there himself and beats the challenges Traveler deals to him. Of course, even if he wins, he'll lose, as victory will mean the doors of Ravencroft get kicked wide open, and the population allowed back into the city streets. Despite the unfair scenario, Spidey hasn't gone so crazy as to ignore the threat, and swings off to Ravencroft, as his clone watches on, listening from the shadows, realizing that Peter's not cut out for the challenge, and is now contemplating whether he should cut his losses and skip town, or do the right thing and help his proverbial brother. After a brief interlude with MJ, our friendly neighborhood nervous wreck makes it to Ravencroft, quickly caught up to speed by Dr. Kafka and Traveler himself, showing but a glimpse into his potential power by effortlessly stopping the cops trying to shoot him down. Traveler again reiterates the rules of his mad experiment to Spidey, who begrudgingly agrees and follows him into the chaotic halls of Ravencroft. Chapter 2 opens up with Cloney Boy, still contemplating his next moves, the urge to throw responsibility to the wind and swing wildly through the streets, taunting him all the while. Back at Ravencroft, with the wacky situation unfurling outside, Traveler is busy torturing Dr. Kafka's assistant, Ed Whalen, for no real reason in particular, using his as-of-yet unexplained powers to forcibly transform him back into vermin, so his host may research him, only to immediately revert him to normal and kicking him onto the street. Spider-Man begins his trial, traipsing through the dreary halls of Ravencroft, coming face to face with his villains in the throes of madness. Spidey's own insane inner monologue dragging himself and the reader into madness as well, all the while he's observed from afar by Traveler. Growing ever distant, we take a brief moment to catch up with Mary Jane. In the wake of Aunt May's unknown fate, she finds herself compelled to return home and make amends with her father and sister, unable to leave those broken connections lying in the face of mortality. While at the same time, the clone has returned to Aunt May's side to try and again find someone to confide in. Spidey's gauntlet has proven quite taxing, his emotions threatening to break what little sanity he has left as he finally comes face to face with Traveler, while our second new mystery villain watches on in the shadows. Traveler easily handles Spider-Man, his fractured mind an open book, and Traveler tells our wall crawler that after spending so long hearing the maddened cries of Ravencroft fighting to comprehend Spider-Man, he too now wants to know exactly what it is that makes the web slinger tick. But something catches his eye and sends him into a laughing fit, pushing Spidey over the edge as he fights Traveler in vain. But the two both know what this joke is. Spidey is far too broken to ever beat Traveler, and the wall crawler succumbs to his emotional distraught and goes mad with grief. Tossing aside Spider-Man to wallow in his own insanity, Traveler, and our mystery pal, now identified as Scryer, decide that the game isn't over yet, putting out a summons to the clone, let the original Spidey die to claim his life as his own, or risk his own artificial life to save him. Chapter 3 starts with the clone giving us a quick recap of events, briefly explaining what he's been up to since we last saw him, drifting across the world trying to find a place he can belong in, distancing himself from the Parker legacy by adopting the alias of Ben Reilly, named after his dear aunt and uncle, and the name we'll be calling him from here on. Ben's turmoil finally reaches its climax, and no matter how much he tries, there's no way he could just let Peter up and die for his own selfish need. Donning a spare mask and some web shooters he'd kept for just such an occasion, Ben swings off into the night to rescue Peter and save the day. As Peter goes deeper into madness, battling his own demons in the depths of his mind, Ben gets a rather warm welcome at Ravencroft, courtesy of the host. Initially giving them the slip, Ben is backed into a corner and tries to convince himself to turn tail and run. But now that he's back in action, that ever-famous motto of the wall crawler compels him to join the battle in earnest, quickly dispatching the host and making his way deeper into the hospital. And with good timing, as Peter has conquered his inner demons and escaped Traveler's grasp, continuing their earlier battle, but now with an extra set of hands to aid him. Traveler, however, simply knocks the two out at the start of our last chapter, locking the two spiders away as he begins the final stages of his experiment. When they wake up, Peter, unsurprisingly, attacks Ben under the assumption he's working for Traveler. As Peter lashes out, Ben can only match blows, calling out Peter for the ranting, bitter madman he's become. But their battle is interrupted by a should-be-expected surprise. Traveler made good on his word and released the inmates, but has left them in the asylum to battle the spiders. The two make a temporary truce to put the madmen down, but Peter chooses to vent his frustrations on the innocent criminal sociopaths, much to Ben's vocal criticism. The surprising camaraderie of the spiders amuses Traveler, who's hard at work crafting one final deceptive trick to secure his escape. As Traveler makes his hasty escape, we get a brief interlude of Mary Jane on her flight, suddenly getting violently ill as her mind races aimlessly. And we return to the spiders triumphant after the first wave of psychos set upon them, and easily dispatch a particularly tough one Ben recognizes as the supervillain Wild Whip, a villain we, the audience, have never met before, but apparently Ben wasn't telling the full truth earlier, and has had a few outings as the wall crawler during his travels. Though they triumph over the immediately forgotten new villain, they hit a major roadblock when Carnage arrives and makes his stand. Ben is able to wrest Peter back from the edge of madness a bit more to work together to take down Carnage, and bust out of the hospital, Peter chasing after Traveler while Ben pursues the host, a rather short-lived pursuit as their getaway car abruptly detonates with him inside. Spidey corners Traveler, but their final showdown is postponed, Traveler simply willing Peter unconscious, but not before promising his return. Spider-Man has yielded quite the interesting results to his experiment, and he's keen to look further. Spider-Man and the Ravencroft staff wake up sometime later, the inmates back in their cells and everything back to normal, and they're all left to ponder on what exactly transpired that night, when Wayland finds a letter from Traveler postmarked from the previous week, claiming that he wasn't able to come visit Ravencroft as planned, in reality a forgery planted by the host to serve as an alibi, leading the staff to assume he was an imposter as they drive off into the night unscathed to further plot their experiments, not just for Spider-Man, but the clone as well. Spider-Man swings off into the night, rejecting a chance to recover his normal life as Ben, surviving the car bomb from earlier, is left to contemplate his own status. With his mission accomplished in New York, does he return himself to exile or remain in the city despite the dangers that brings? Power and Responsibility is a strong opening arc, both narratively and artistically. We quickly establish our event's premise and our major players, both good and bad. Ben is immediately endearing to the reader, his own woes of inferiority relatable, while also proving himself to still be capable of being the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, even when the original can't. While the status quo had been anything but stagnant up to now, the first chapter of the Clone Saga immediately kicks it into overdrive, and it's not planning on slowing down anytime soon. While Traveler is a bit, questionable at the moment, his motives are defined but horribly obtuse, his assistants are poorly developed, and his power set is ill-defined and bordering on omnipotent, creating a confused ball of potential tangents to follow. This seems to be the sentiment shared by most of the writing staff, according to Greenberg, as despite being our main focus in this arc and possibly beyond, Traveler doesn't really fit in, and there's no real consistent personality or narrative direction with him as of yet, though DeMatteis has certainly taken a shine to him. Nevertheless, he does prove to be an effective foe for the demented mind of Spider-Man, so we'll see if he manages to carve out a proper niche. From here, the book split focus for a while, with Webb and ASM focusing on Ben-centric stories, whereas ASM and SSM focused on Peter. These arcs would occur simultaneously with one another, but for the sake of sanity, we'll do them one at a time. Following the official ordering, our first stop is Web 118, with the Exile Returns. We start off with Ben on a sightseeing tour, impulsively driven around the city as he tries to will himself to leave, constantly shown reminders of the life and responsibility that was never his. But it seems he'll get a rather big reason to stay soon, as Venom is back in town, having learned of the incident at Ravencroft and making the trip to the Big Apple to make sure Carnage is still safely locked up, while also getting in a bit of lethal protecting done in the process. Both Ben and Venom take some trips down memory lane, visiting various places across the city important to their pasts. And after some horribly convenient heroics, Ben gets dragged in deeper when he learns Venom is in town. Appalled that Spidey never managed to take down the big beast, Ben takes it upon himself to solve the problems his originator couldn't, quickly cobbling together his own spider suit and swinging off into action. In the official read order, this story is interrupted by Spider-Man Unlimited number 7, an extra-length, quarterly release featuring several longer format stories. This issue is only partially featured though, covering just the first segment focusing on Ben, taking a break from his search for Venom to beat down some local hoodlums making trouble in his temporary neighborhood. It's not an important story to the plot, or even all that good, but it gives the audience that sweet, delectable treat they've been so desperately denied for some time. A jovial Spider-Man cracking wise and thrashing thugs to keep the peace. It handily establishes Ben's personality, that despite his own melancholic identity crisis, he's still the same wall-crawling nuisance at heart, showing that he's, ironically, more capable of being Spider-Man than the real deal. The other two stories, one involving Spidey crossing paths with anti-hero Cardiac, and the other a pointless story about Mary Jane, are not included and really aren't worth discussing. Chapter 2 picks up sometime later, with Daily Bugle reporter and resident Venom aficionado Ken Ellis hot on the trail of the big monster, and Benny Boys all too keen to get the scoop from Ellis, but only if Ellis gets himself an interview first. Ellis points the second-rate Spidey towards Roosevelt Island, where sure enough, Venom is currently stalking, ranting, and raving to himself from the rooftops about how his kind work of cleaning up crime is underappreciated by the fine people of New York. His protests ignored by the people below, save for yet another mysterious figure watching along in the distance. Ben catches up to Venom, immediately second-guessing himself as he dives headfirst into battle, and even quicker regretting it as Venom's power level far exceeds his estimates. Venom quickly deduces Ben isn't the real Spidey, annoyed that his deal is being disrespected by this amateur copycat. If you're not familiar, this refers to ASM 375, where Venom and Spidey cut each other a deal to leave each other alone, coinciding with the start of Lethal Protector and Venom's shift into becoming an anti-hero. Ben, understandably, had no knowledge of this. Not that it would have swayed him into letting Venom roam around unsupervised, even if he did. But Ben gets a lucky save thanks to the symbiote Scream, coming to try and help Venom escape from the growing crowds, only to get dragged into a fight with him instead, with our second-rate Spidey playing cleanup by helping innocents caught in the crossfire. Luckily, Ben would get his chance to strike. While Scream begs for help with controlling your symbiote, Venom would be too distracted to avoid taking a nice long fall into the river, dragging the other symbiote with him. The fight ended, for now. Ben would be fed up with this insistent need for responsibility, and though the bystanders see him as a hero, he only sees himself as an imposter, snubbing Ellis's interview and deciding he's leaving town for good. But Ellis is conspiring one last way to keep Ben in town, already hard at work on his article on New York's newest hero, the Scarlet Spider. Chapter 3 kicks off with Ben returning to his home, doing his best patch job to buy him time to get his stuff and get out of town, stopping to place a call to his lone friend in this world, Dr. Seward? Sward? C-word? Dr. Trainer for help, but Ben passes out before he can get a word out. Ben gets a lucky break though when his lucky new neighbor Gabrielle finds him dying on the ground, and like the good Samaritan she is, drags him off to the doctor. And after a brief interlude where Venom is ransacking the Parker residencies looking for info on his second-rate foe, we find Ben getting the help he needs. But unfortunately, one of the nurses narks on Ben to Ellis, who rushes over to the clinic to cash in on his exclusive interview rights with the Scarlet Spider, and Scream is tagging along for the ride. While this goes on, we get our proper introduction to our third all-powerful mystery villain teased prior, the masked assassin, Kaine. The big masked beast is in town, hired by a local crime syndicate to take down a rival family's leader. But when he learns of the newly born Scarlet Spider, he decides to drop the contract in the most abrupt way possible, leaving his former employers branded with some quite gruesome-looking wounds. Later, Ben's back on his feet, and not a moment too soon, managing to slip out the old-fashioned way when Ellis comes walking around. But he dodges one unwanted guest for another. Scream is waiting on the rooftops for him, seeking his aid, same as she was Venom. Ben tells her to fuck off and bails, hoping she gets bored, but this only makes her madder, smashing up the clinic on her way out. Ben tries his best to help without directly engaging the insane symbiote, but not enough to sate his inner Parker melancholy, unwillingly reminded of how Peter's inaction one fateful day led to Uncle Ben's death, and the stalwart copy returns home to prepare, arming up for the coming conflict. a conflict that comes sooner than expected, as Scream is continuing her tantrum down in Times Square until Venom swings in to try and take her down, tearing her up with ease until he gets a taste of the Scarlet Spider's fancy new gadget, ultra-compressed impact webbing, before the second-rate Spidey drops in to take him down face to face. 30 seconds later, in Chapter 4, and Ben has immediately lost any advantage he had. On the ropes and ready to give up, the Scarlet Spider finds his mind wandering to, who else? Aunt May, giving him the courage needed for another round at the symbiote menace. Finally back into the swing of things, no pun intended, the second-rate Spidey shows he's anything but, and gives Venom his full power, and shows him a handy demonstration of what his new impact webbing can really do after his preview earlier, entombing Venom in a cocoon of webbing. With Venom subdued for the time being, Ben takes a moment to recover physically and mentally, pondering the possible circumstances for Spidey's deal with the Beast, and wondering just how much his genetic brother has changed for the worse, or whether it's him who's changed. Unfortunately, his break is all too brief. Venom claws his way out of the cocoon, pissed as all hell as a new round starts. Dragged down to the sprawling streets below, Venom thrashes Ben in his customary manner, until the Scarlet Spider gives him a much-needed dose of medicine, which manages to split Eddie from the symbiote, opening up just enough for another one of Ben's new tricks, paralytic spider stingers, slowing down the dynamic duo just enough for a hail of blows, managing the impossible feat of taking down Venom for good. All the while, the spider's victory is observed from afar, as we get our first full look at Kaine, observing his prey, waiting patiently to strike. Scarlet's victory is short-lived once the symbiote itself gets back up for more, reaching out for the Scarlet Spider, and when it recognizes the familiar feeling of Peter Parker, lunges to merge itself with him. But Ben has just enough strength left to break the connection and finally ending Venom, for now, at least. With Eddie and the symbiote locked up, the Scarlet Spider swings off into the night. His victory over the monstrous foe the true Spider-Man could never manage to fully conquer gives our second-rate Spider a much-needed boost to his self-esteem, convincing him that maybe he's got a reason to finally try and make a real life for himself. Throughout the issue, and joining the Spider at the end, we have several quick interludes, setting up new plots and new characters, which, to make things easier for us all, I've saved for the end. In order, we see Ellis feverishly slaving away at the dark, empty Bugle offices, where he has a surprisingly positive conversation with Jonah, a quick introduction to the next arc's villain, the neither new nor neither mysterious Grim Hunter, more on him later, a jump on over to Salt Lake City, where another new face, Detective Jacob Raven, receives evidence from New York, pertaining to the men Kaine killed earlier, and the detective has been hot on the Masked Menace's trail for 2 long years, plotting a course for the big city to take him down once and for all. And a mysterious crime lord named Gavin Thorpe, taking control of his family's organization the good old-fashioned way, and his first plan of action, eliminating Spider-Man. Exile Returns is a really damn good first outing for our Spidey Club. A good old-fashioned story of the wall crawler fighting himself as much as he is the villains. The choice to have Ben go up against Venom is a good first pick. As both are essentially mirrors of Peter Parker, it makes sense for the two to go head-to-head. And the meta-commentary of Spidey letting Venom go free is a smart one. At the time, the circumstances of Venom's turn to mostly good weren't very well received to either readers or staff. Seen as a very out-of-character decision for Spidey, and having Ben be outright opposed to it, he gets rooted right back on the rails that Peter should be on. The inclusion of Scream is rather pointless though, and all the interludes getting crammed in at the very end is awkward. In terms of new characters, though Ellis is somewhat forgettable, he's a pretty standard archetype done well, and Kaine is easily the most interesting mystery villain we've gotten so far, not that that bar has been set very high, and as a new reader, I know I was hooked on him even if he's hilariously outdated visually speaking. But also I unironically like Kaine's costume, so fuck you, it's my show, I get to decide what's cool or not. Speaking of, the Scarlet Spider name and costume are cheap, cheesy, and really highlight how much of a second-rate, cheap copy Ben is. And this is, of course, deliberate. Both the name and costume were never meant to last longer than the Clone Saga, which at this point wasn't meant to last any more than a few months, and no one really expected it to last beyond it. Nowadays, it's an absolutely iconic, beloved Spidey look that fans have been clamoring for ever since. And honestly, it works for Ben. Where he sees himself as a second-rate copy, it only makes sense for his look to match. But with Ben's story done for now, we jump over to see what Peter's been up to, with Back from the Edge. Peter's been reeling from the events of our last story, walking through his memories and passing time with the ghosts of the past. Still struggling with his identity problems, no longer sure whether he's man or spider, our friendly neighborhood psychological enigma has set himself down the path to well and truly kill Peter Parker, or perhaps to revive him. Spidey abandons the cold, empty Parker residence and heads off to his old high school, and after a quick interlude where Mary Jane has returned to her childhood home, face to face with her sister and ready to make amends, the Spider wanders down the halls greeted by more of Parker's memories of forgotten friends and classmates. But this time he's not alone. With a twofold greeting by some familiar faces, his on-again, off-again foe, the Puma, and the mysterious mutant Batwoman, Nocturne. The two aren't actually here to fight the wall crawler, but to help. And out around a comfortable campfire, Nocturne explains that she's actually here to help Spider-Man deal with his madness and recover his humanity, while helping the Puma at the same time. See, Puma's been having a hard time of it. When last we saw him, he'd gotten a nice big lead sandwich served up to him and was presumed dead, but as tends to be the case, he had managed to survive, though barely. Nocturne had aided his recovery physically, but the man beneath the cat is still broken, turning the Puma into a feral weapon of vengeance. Showing loyalty to the mysterious Batwoman, Nocturne has been guiding Puma to direct his feral rage at those who deserve it, but it's about time she gets him back to normal. Unfortunately, Puma remembers the normal, a bit inaccurately if that, and launches into a frenzied attack on the Spider. Chapter 2 launches right into said attack, the Spider trying to beat down both Puma, as well as his own conscience, struggling to put his responsibility down and take out Puma without worrying about the man underneath. Fortunately, the battle doesn't last long enough to worry, with Puma's own conscience kicking in when Nocturne wakes up and fleeing into the night. Spidey tries to follow suit, but his madness won't permit him to abandon an injured woman alone at night, even if she is a freaky Batwoman. And as the Puma tears through the city streets in a mad frenzy, Spidey struggles to find somewhere to safely leave Nocturne, initially planning on leaving her at the apartment she had when she was a normal human, but when he finds it occupied, he's dealt a nice healthy dose of reality, realizing that the passage of time waits for no man, Spider or otherwise, and his inner turmoil won't put an end to everyone else's lives, something Nocturne makes all the clearer when she awakens again, making her motives to save Puma clear to the deeply repressed humanity of our favorite web-slinger, fittingly mirrored by an interlude of MJ's aunt giving a tearful farewell to Aunt May, and Mary Jane herself having a nice heart-to-heart with her sister. With Nocturne back in action and Spidey committed to her quest, the two set out once more to find Puma. We have a quick crossover break, as Chapter 2 was advertised as being a team-up with the new Daredevil, more info on that in a minute, but that largely amounts to a single page where Spidey sees him swinging past the two, calling him a douchebag, and going on with the story. The two finally catch up with Puma, who's gone even further into madness, and Spidey is forced to engage his foe as Nocturne watches on helplessly. But after another quick interlude of MJ and her sister, Nocturne musters up the courage to act, leaping headfirst into the battle and using her powers to mentally connect Spidey and the Puma, and reach a united enlightenment of their true natures. The Puma's feral spirit is subdued, and with his mind restored, so is his human form, and with not a single word of protest, he leaves the site of battle, though not without some protest from Spidey, who is further rebuked when Nocturne refuses her own chance at help when offered, ending the chapter with Spider-Man once more alone to bear the weight of his own problems. Chapter 3 picks up a few days later, with Spider-Man tracking down our new Daredevil, currently hard at work tracking down his old nemesis, the Owl. For some context, Daredevil's currently in the midst of his own reinvention. During the events of Daredevils 319 through 325, an intern at the Daily Bugle steals files from Matt's buddy Ben Urich, pertaining to the Man Without Fear's secret identity, selling it to a local tabloid and publicly exposing Daredevil's identity to the world. For those of you keeping track, this was like the 8th fucking time this had happened at this point. Nevertheless, Daredevil decided that having a secret identity was far too much trouble for what it's worth, and chose instead to fake his death to save his loved ones from the consequences of his war on crime. With a brand new identity, and a brand new costume he picked up in that arc to boot, Daredevil recommenced his role as the Man Without Fear, now free to pursue heroics without the burden that was his old life. Naturally, of course, our story starts off with Spidey immediately realizing that he's just the same guy as before and completely collapsing the facade without even trying. While Spidey tries to court Daredevil's help, we check in on a different team of brewing, with Daredevil's longtime nemesis the Owl, freshly out of jail and himself having his own identity crisis, teaming up with the Vulture. After another quick pit stop with Mary Jane remembering some good old-fashioned childhood trauma, Spider-Man is hard at work trying to win Daredevil's favor, begging the Man Without Fear to teach him how to accomplish what Matt Murdock, barely, did, and well and truly kill Peter Parker to abandon his old life. While Daredevil's not exactly trying all that hard to convince Spidey he's totally definitely not Matt Murdock, he eventually gives in to the wall crawler's incessant whining. Daredevil tries to make a point by taking Spider-Man to his own grave, to pontificate, and teach Spidey exactly what he wants to know. Emphasis on try because Matt just says a bunch of nonsense, tells Spidey to kill himself, and gives him a handful of dirt. Shockingly, this doesn't get Spider-Man to fuck off and leave him alone, but Daredevil's a bit more willing to let him hang around when our friendly neighborhood Deathseeker offers help in tracking down the Owl. Speaking of, we cut back to our avian adversaries, as the Vulture reveals the master scheme he's drawn up for the two. See, the two feather foes are themselves in the midst of their own reinventions, same as our heroes, seeking to kill their past lives and become reborn in new identities. The Vulture, however, has chosen the far more convoluted and far more violent plan of action, deciding that the best solution to creating new identities is by killing the memories of their old identities. And by killing their identities, I of course mean breaking into a government lab to steal a manufactured supervirus, which he plans to have covertly spread throughout the city to infect and painfully kill anyone ever associated with their lives, thus somehow ensuring the world forgets the old Vulture and Owl ever existed. Naturally, the Owl thinks the Vulture is an absolute fucking lunatic, and his plan is completely retarded, and after Vulture reveals they never developed a vaccine for this virus, he wisely gets the hell out of there. Unsurprisingly, this just puts him into bigger danger, leaping from the Vulture's lair right into the path of our heroes. But no fight comes tonight, as one of the Vulture's birds, which is decidedly not a fucking vulture he's using here, swoops in and takes a swipe at Spidey, knocking him out cold as the virus takes root. Chapter 4 picks up moments later, with Spidey going through some mighty strong delusions while Daredevil sits there trying to figure out if he should do something or not. Eventually he does, taking a swing at the Owl to keep him from retreating, but the Vulture, immediately blowing any potential deniability in the scheme, swoops in at the last second to save him, sending a few more birds which have mysteriously now shapeshifted into being fucking vultures for this single panel to come and attack, but Spidey's got just enough energy left to web him up and plant a trace around the Owl. After a quick cutaway back with MJ, having finally worked up the courage to meet her father again, we return to the Vulture's hideout where for some goddamn reason, the Owl is still hanging around with him. Shockingly, the Vulture is still insane and reveals that he's already making moves on killing off Owl's old friends first, finally convincing Owl to bail. The Vulture, far too quickly to be believed, reveals that there was a cure all along, tossing the vial to the Owl, who immediately beelines to rescue his former acquaintance from the psychotic plot he's gotten wrapped up in. However, he hesitates at the last few moments of the man's life, his own indecisiveness of his life leading to his once and former friend losing his. We get another cutaway to MJ, where the tense family reunion boils over thanks to a good old-fashioned case of misunderstandings, but cools off once her father begins opening up, putting the two on good terms for the first time in years, as MJ heads back home, confident in her own place in the world. Afterwards, we catch back up with Spidey and DD. Unable to get a good enough sample of the virus from the flying germ bombs, the two head out to confront the villains directly and settle their problems the old-fashioned way, Spidey's condition ever worsening as the night drags on, the wall crawler hiding his affliction as poorly as Daredevil is hiding his real identity. Unfortunately, the Owl, who has just kind of resigned himself to the stupid bullshit he's stuck in, accidentally smashes the tracer, leaving the two as blind as, well, as Daredevil usually is, I guess. But some spiritual mumbo-jumbo kicks in, which I guess lets Daredevil read the script or something because he's able to find out where the villains are hiding out, and the fight ensues. Our heroes are laser-focused on the Vulture, because I guess they figured that this plan was only stupid enough to be his idea solely, and while Daredevil focuses on the Vulture, Spider-Man focuses on taking care of the last remaining birds, putting an end to this stupid story. Or so they thought, as two of the birds managed to escape the chaos. With the Vulture subdued, Spidey leaps out to stop the escapees, catching one but missing the other. Luckily, the Owl, who's finally remembered he's not a complete idiot, takes out the other bird, tossing Spidey the cure and bidding the heroes farewell. Choosing to leave the remaining mess for the cops, Spidey downs the cure and Daredevil leaves Spidey with a really lazy pep talk, and Spider-Man is left alone once more, but no longer the broken man he once was, deciding that after everything he's gone through the last few days, that Peter Parker deserves to live. Unfortunately, that time is growing ever shorter, as we're left on a blunt cliffhanger. The supposed cure was nothing more than regular water. Spider-Man is still infected with the virus, and who knows how long he has left to live. While this arc goes away to restoring Spidey's status quo, it's really not all that good. The two separate plot lines make it come off very slapped together, and neither one is particularly interesting enough, and more importantly, just not very good in general. The mirrored theme of the two villains themselves having persona problems is a strong basis for the arc, but the Puma's redemption lacks much in the way of substance, and the Owl's redemption is well written, but is unfortunately saddled with being involved with everything else in the story. Daredevil's inclusion as well is fairly unremarkable. Again, I understand the intent with his inclusion, but he does basically nothing productive whatsoever, and his advice to Spidey is so meaningless you could have had it be the fucking stilt man telling Spidey and it'd have the same weight to it. Still, I do like the overall theme behind the arc. Having Spider-Man reclaim his own humanity inadvertently by helping others do so is a great concept. I just wish it had a more cohesive plot. The MJ segments were also really good. I enjoyed the soap opera-y family drama that touched on her personal life, not connected to Peter. I think that could have used a little bit more time, though. Our next story arc brings us back to the Scarlet Spider for Web of Life. While Petey's been off soul-searching, Ben's been making quite the name for himself in the Caped Crusading game, quickly attracting bouts all across town, be it big game foes like Tombstone, or literal who's like these Ares chumps. But he may be biting off more than he can chew, as he's got not one, but two costume lunatics with intimate knowledge of his potential out for his head. Our mystery friend Kaine, alongside the previously introduced Grim Hunter. Since you've never heard of Grim Hunter, and don't lie to me, I know you haven't, the simple version is that he's the previously unmentioned son of Kraven the Hunter, who's traveled to New York to slay Spider-Man and claim vengeance for his father's death, apparently unaware that his dad died to a critical mishandling of firearms and not by Spidey's hands. So far, he's made a grand total of 1 attempt at this, which failed miserably, so clearly targeting our second-rate Spidey will go better. With both Spiders busy with their responsibilities, our mystery mound of meat, Kaine, is left to ponder to himself over Aunt May's life and its sway over the two heroes. But he's spurred into action thanks to a most astounding sight, receiving a psychic premonition foretelling Mary Jane's oncoming death by unknown forces. While Mary Jane prepares to head home, the Grim Hunter is hot on Spider-Man's trail, and Ben finally comes to accept how much he truly needs the allure of superheroics in his life. Though he's still not thrilled about the name he's earned, he's begun to fully realize the potential a mask can bring, which is why he immediately heads straight to Betty Brant's house to try and hit on her. Hey, he does still have Peter's emotions after all. Of course, there's no fun to be had tonight, and whatever mood Benny left lingering with his visit gets killed when Grim Hunter, tracking the wrong spider, crashes through Betty's place hot on his trail. Chapter 2 picks up a few hours later, with Ben plotting bloody vengeance on his greatest foe yet, Bad Publicity, heading over to the Daily Bugle to give Ellis a personal review of his journalistic efforts. But the only thing Ben finds are the ghosts of his, or rather Peter's, past, haunted by the memories of Parker's youth at the Bugle embedded deep into his mind. At least that is until the real Jameson appears amidst the delusions. Old Jonah gives the Scarlet Spider his stamp of approval, in the traditional Jolly Jonah fashion, and Ben takes the opportunity to give Jonah a taste of his own medicine on his way out. Nevertheless, this was exactly what Ben's needed. Even if they're not his memories, reliving his past with a new outlook has given him a much-deserved boost in his self-esteem, and he truly believes that he's finally got someone with good intentions watching over him. But naturally, that's farther from the truth, as the only person watching over him is, as always, Kaine. With a quick check-in on Grim Hunter, lost to madness and plotting to drag Betty into his hunt for the spider, and a quick pit stop with Mary Jane at the doctor's office, where it seems some rather alarming news is headed her way, Ben is further emboldened when his neighbor from before asks him out on a date, sending him, literally, leaping for joy. Kaine, meanwhile, is rather annoyed that Ben is happy, and takes out his anger by murdering some random street thugs, branding them with the same scars as from before, matching the patterns on his mask. While our two spiders sleep, one better than the other, and Kaine continuing to be a creep, the two begin having the same strange dream of fragmented visions of emerging from the Jackal's cloning chamber, a dream that seems to upset Kaine, causing him intense pain for the duration. Though the images were unclear, Ben seems to have an idea of what's up, calling his pal Dr. Trainer, who for some reason is dressed like he's auditioning for the X-Men, warning him that his clone body may be undergoing degeneration. Trainer is more annoyed than concerned though, giving Ben a "I told you so" response and booking a trip to New York to check in on Benny Boy. Ben, as is tradition for the Parker lineage, immediately panics instead, swinging out into the night back to Betty's place, eager to resume their conversation from before. Though Betty's no longer interested in the Scarlet Spider from a journalistic mind, she's found herself oddly compelled by him for other reasons that she can't quite figure out, and won't get a chance to figure out, as the Grim Hunter has finally caught up with his prey. After a quick trip to NYPD headquarters, where Detective Raven has arrived in search of his own prey, himself seeking vengeance for the death of his partner, the fight commences. The Scarlet Spider, naturally, has no fucking clue who this wackadoo is or why he's trying to kill him, but he's not stupid enough to try and talk things out to some dude armed to the gills with sharp objects. Despite his legacy, the Grim Hunter is only barely able to keep up with our second-rate wall crawler, managing to match blows, but not much more. And it's only once Ben tells him he's got the wrong guy about 20 fucking times that he finally realizes he's not the real Spider-Man and breaks off the fight. Ben initially moves to pursue, but breaks off his chase to check on Betty, and though she's glad to see him, Ben only pushes her away, the stark reality of his true nature causing him to abandon any chance at a normal life. Chapter 3 opens up with a brief snippet of Kaine, mercilessly slaughtering some generic thugs who are cartoonishly assaulting and robbing a homeless woman for literally, absolutely no good reason, while the Scarlet Spider is hot on the Grim Hunter's trail, doing some casual do-gooding in the process. As the Grim Hunter spirals further into madness, his assistant Gregor left only to watch his downfall, Detective Raven confirms that the man he's after is the same mystery killer loose in New York, who we now know to be Kaine. And what's more, he's made a fatal error, accidentally leaving his fingerprints at the scene of the crime. And when those prints match NYPD records, Raven decides it's time he meets his prey face to face. But we won't have time to worry about that, as we already know where Kaine is, stalking the Scarlet Spider in the shadows. The Scarlet Spider is himself stalking from the shadows, lying in wait outside Peter's apartment to catch the Grim Hunter unaware. However, Kaine misinterprets the affair, and declaring that Ben's involvement jeopardizes his currently unknown and previously unmentioned plans for Peter and MJ, he launches from the shadows and strikes at the Scarlet Spider, catching him by surprise as his spider sense fails to alert him of the first assault. It's here we confirm earlier suspicions, that Kaine already knows that Ben is the Scarlet Spider, and what's more shocking is that Ben already knows who Kaine is. Ben tries his best to take out Kaine and divert attention to the Hunter, arriving during the whole debacle, but he's not strong enough to take him down, and Kaine lives up to his namesake by taking Ben out of the picture. But to our surprise, Kaine's not done here, squaring off with the Grim Hunter one-on-one. The fight kicks off right away in the final chapter, where Kaine, now realizing the Hunter was why Benny Boy was creeping on Peter, declares the Hunter must die by his hands. Whatever his end goal is, keeping Spider-Man and his family alive is essential to that goal, and he won't allow anything to get in the way. As their fight drags on, Ben struggles back to his feet, back on the duo's trail with the utmost haste, only making a quick stop to check on Peter and MJ, that is until he gets distracted by their cold and empty apartment. Once more finding himself lost down the twisting road of memories he finds himself denied. After a quick check-in elsewhere in town, where Dr. Trainer has made it to the city in search of Ben, the Spider catches up to the two villains in the heat of battle. Tempted though he is to just let the two duke it out and mop up the leftovers, he just doesn't have the heart to be so callous. Not that he has the body for the alternative, passing out again from his wounds as Grim Hunter gets a cheap shot on Kaine before running away like a bitch. Unsurprisingly, Kaine's not down for the count and storms off, though Ben gets a lucky break by tagging him with a tracer. Ben wakes up a bit later, wearily returning to his would-be home to recover, and finds his good friend Dr. Trainer waiting for him. Trainer tries to convince Ben to put the mask down for the night and come back to his lab, but with Kaine still on the loose, he can't allow himself to stop just yet. While Kaine is hot on his foe's trail, only interrupted by yet another ghastly vision of Mary Jane's death, the Grim Hunter is lying in wait at Central Park, managing to catch the masked murder machine by surprise, even if he fails to take advantage of it. Though not that he gets a chance at a second round, as the Spider swoops in to deliver the smackdown to Kaine, successfully parrying his assault and taking him down with his fancy gadgets. Unfortunately, the ever-present moral code dilemma kicks in, and Kaine plunges headfirst into a frozen lake, forcing Ben to dive in to rescue his attempted killer, only for both Kaine and the Hunter to escape the Spider's web, and Ben gives up his search to instead warn Peter of the two killers. Poor, unlucky Ben, as if he just stuck around for a bit longer, he'd find his targets much closer than he thought, and with the menacing do-gooder out of the picture, the two Hunters get their chance to really square off with each other. An impressively short fight, though it is, as the Grim Hunter is slain with ease, branded, like so many others, by the mark of Kaine. Web of Life is a bit of a step down in quality compared to Ben's last arc, though we get some great moments of the Scarlet Spider hard at work, proving his worth as a hero. The overarching plot isn't all that exciting. It's largely due to our primary focus being Grim Hunter, who's just such an exceptionally boring character without an interesting motive, or really any good reason to be here. The premise of him going after Ben, thinking he's Spidey, isn't terrible on a base level, but it's a bit too flimsy to hold up across 4 issues, which I assume is why they threw Kaine in there in the back half. And while I liked that the theme of the last arc is continued, with Ben still trying to find a unique place in the world alongside Peter, they spend so much time focusing on the plot between him and Betty, only to drop it halfway with nothing to replace it. Not that I found the subplot particularly engaging, mind you. It's got a fine premise, but seemed like it'd be heading straight for misunderstandings plot territory if it went any longer. That all being said, I think Kaine is established very well in this arc. Though he's dripping in melodramatic edge, and his currently undisclosed motive being so closely tied to Peter seems like it's trying too hard to make him mysterious. Out of our new villains so far, it's definitely got the strongest foundation. Plus, as Kaine's already aware of Spidey's identity, and with Ben well acquainted with the masked menace at the start, you can see plenty of potential for the character going forward. even if his proper debut basically amounts to a frivolous squash match against an overproduced jobber. But we've seen enough of Ben, but not of Kaine, for now, as we move on to Web of Death, with Spidey flying across the rooftops in a mad panic, desperate to find some solution to his ever-approaching death. His only accompaniment being his increasingly maddening thoughts and the watchful eyes of, once again, Kaine. That is, until a shocking memory pops into his mind, a memory he shouldn't have, one where he's stuck in some sort of pod wrapped up in tubes. Though we already know what this memory entails, Spidey doesn't, and the new source of panic knocks him out cold, left to draw his last breaths alone on the city rooftops. But someone does find Spidey in the throes of death this night, though it's the farthest thing from a good Samaritan the wall crawler could hope for, falling into the clutches of his oldest and greatest foe, Dr. Octopus. Doc Ock engages in a bit of meta commentary, musing to himself how much he and Spidey have changed since they first met, and not necessarily for the better in the wall crawler's case. There's no more joy to be found in crushing his greatest foe in the state he's in now, not when the Vulture has seemingly beat him to it. And Otto seems more interested in finding out what exactly drives his foe in his last moments, choosing instead to leave him on the rooftops as Spidey begins to awaken once more. Meanwhile, in an unassuming and unsuspecting downtown bar, the mild and weary patrons are about to experience a night like any other, with the sudden arrival of the new and fittingly named Stunner, who finds the bar to be lacking by her standards and letting the management know how she feels. But things calm down when her beloved boyfriend walks in, none other than our pal Doc Ock, and the two return to his hideout. The fun of the night doesn't go on though, as Otto vents to his love that with Spider-Man having devolved from the jolly genius smart mouth he was into yet another grim and edgy vigilante, he's found himself relating to Spider-Man all too much, and he doesn't like that one bit. In fact, he admits that he liked Spider-Man the way he was, knowing that whoever he was under the mask was no different than the mask itself. And with the contrast between them, Otto saw him as an anchor to keep himself from drowning in his own villainous persona. With that balance gone, Otto too is finding himself lost in the sea of madness. But his beloved Stunner is able to console him with some kind commentary, but this comfort is short-lived, as for reasons unknown she suddenly vanishes, though she seems to know this will only be temporary. After a quick check-in with Mary Jane, having returned home from Pittsburgh to find the mess Peter's left for her, we cut back to Spidey, having finally admitted that it's time he take off the mask and return back to his family. But this train of thought gets cut off by sudden flashes of memories not his own. Memories we already know are of the clone in Professor Warren's lab. Memories Peter shouldn't have, and the shock of these scenes sends him hurtling off the roof. Luckily, he gets saved by the now rematerialized Stunner, mostly so she can kick his ass herself. Stunner quickly gets under Spidey's skin, more amused at the silly game that is superheroics, and hitting Spidey hard enough for him to finally realize what a gigantic idiot he's been for the last few issues, I mean weeks, but not long enough for it to stick when she knocks him out. While Stunner savors the victory, Doc Ock arrives to spoil the fun. Having assumed Spidey's lethal affliction was nothing but a ruse, he arranged for this battle to test the wall crawler. And after being so easily beaten, it shows that Spider-Man is far, far worse than he possibly imagined. Doc Ock refuses to allow his foe to die so broken and sick, vowing to save his greatest nemesis, the chapter ending on the good doctor unmasking Spider-Man. Chapter 2 picks up back in the Doc's lab, where he's hard at work devising a cure to his foe's affliction as Spidey writhes in unconscious agony, plagued again by the memories of the clone's birth. Otto's work is bearing little headway, and after a bout of percussive maintenance on his equipment, he decides to take a break and call the Parker house to inform Aunt May of her nephew's state, only to find Anna Watson there to break the bad news of May's tragic state to the Doc. Wanting to pay his respects to his once and former lover, he sends Stunner out to get May some flowers so he can continue his work. But the lab isn't left entirely alone, as deep within the far-off shadows, Doc Ock's secret lab is watched over by the ever-present eyes of, who else? Kaine, declaring the mighty villain to be yet another obstacle in the grand tapestry he has set out for Spider-Man. After another quick check-in with Mary Jane, currently visiting Aunt May and begging and pleading for her to wake up, and for a new reason, as something she's just learned from the doctor, as we saw earlier, will change the entire Parker family forever. Back at the lab, the Doc hits Spidey with what he hopes to be the cure, sending the wall crawler, literally, bouncing around the lab in agony, hurtling out the window and through the city streets powered by pure adrenaline. Doc Ock nabs the friendly neighborhood cannonball, however, and muses over his success. Finally taking a moment to admire the humor of the entire situation, mostly that of unmasking Spider-Man to discover Peter Parker again, he leaves Spidey alone again, fully suited up near his apartment. Spider-Man isn't entirely sure of what's been going on the last few hours, but he is sure of one thing. The wretched virus plaguing him is gone for good, and with a new lease on life and his personal demons slain, it's finally time for the wall crawler to return home and put everything back to normal for both of his lives. And wouldn't luck have it, but Peter gets home just the same time Mary Jane does, and the two are more eager to put their problems aside for just one night and rekindle their emotions. But not for very long, as Doc Ock and Peter discover the newly made cure's effect is only temporary, and the effects of the disease are already returning. Peter tries his best to cover up his pain, and with good reason. Now reunited, MJ finally reveals the startling news she learned mere hours ago. She's pregnant, and the two of them are about to become parents. Chapter 3 begins immediately after this wonderful surprise, and Peter is, once again, literally, leaping for joy at this momentous revelation, the moment shared vicariously from the shadows by the observing eyes of it's Doc Ock this time. Peter's symptoms begin flaring up once more, though he's able to suppress them enough to avoid concerning MJ, and decides that tonight they should celebrate even more, and make a trip to visit Aunt May along the way. Though MJ is still concerned, but for different reasons, worried about how Peter's radioactive spider powers will affect their child. Peter has a nice chat with Aunt May, telling her about the baby and begging her to wake up. The words manage to spark some life in May, her thoughts racing for the first time in weeks, as she struggles to find the energy to keep going, but it's not enough to break her from the coma just yet. Though Peter's held up so far, their wonderful celebratory dinner gets cut short with a nice double whammy. The disease's effects begin ramping up to the max. And though they're convinced to cut the night short by Detective Raven, who just kinda happened to be at the restaurant too, I guess, any intent of a quiet night home ends when Peter spots Doc Ock on the rooftops, suiting up and swinging out, eager to find out what role the good doctors played in all of this. Spider-Man jumps right in for a good old-fashioned duel with Dr. Octopus, but Otto's not in any mood for these costume shenanigans when he reveals he's perfected the cure and is eager to ensure his great nemesis gets a long and healthy life for future beatings. Spidey begrudgingly accepts the doc's advice, heading off into the night. After a brief aside where Stunner's mindless race through the city exploring her abilities gets interrupted by an ominous warning to stay away from Dr. Octopus, administered from the far-off shadows by, unsurprisingly, Kaine. Back at the lab, Peter is increasingly hesitant to believe Doc Ock's altruism, refusing to accept that the cure is as successful as it is no matter how many times he tests it, at least until Otto baits him into taking it by trying to destroy it. The cure kicks in quickly, though not quietly, leaving Spidey shrieking in pain as he collapses to the cold floor of the lab, leading to a rather bizarre sequence where the wall-crawler's soul leaves his body, begins floating through the skies in a mad panic, brought face to face with the spirits of the departed, until he gets put back on track with a message from Aunt May, who puts the friendly neighborhood tormented spirit on the right path in a great golden light. Chapter 4, however, shows that might not have been the right turn, as Spider-Man is only brought further into spiritual limbo as he comes face to face with Uncle Ben and his parents, for realsies this time. Doc Ock does his best to resuscitate Spidey in the real world, and though Harry tries one last prank from beyond the grave, the good doctor's efforts bear fruit, saving his nemesis' life for the second time that night. But Otto's still got something planned for this evening, something he needs to be alone for, sending out his lovely Stunner so he can have the lab to just the two costumed foes. Ever the while observed by, take a guess, Kaine. With Spidey back on his feet and healthy again, there's only one thing left to do, a good old-fashioned costume brawl between longtime rivals. Is what I'd like to say happens, but instead a SWAT team suddenly busts into the lab to apprehend Doc Ock. Of course, this was all a part of the good doctor's plan. Knowing Spidey would want to fight, he had Stunner call the cops to remove himself from the equation so his foe could properly recover his full strength. Dr. Octopus gets the last laugh this night, carted off by the cops, with Spider-Man owing him a debt of gratitude. Spidey's not going to let it get to him this time, though. Back from the edges of death and madness, it's time he really celebrates the bountiful blessings his life has been given, the way he should have been all this time. Of course, things aren't really over yet. You'd think Dr. Octopus would let himself get carted off by the cops with no escape plan. No, he already had his jailbreak planned before he even got there, courtesy of his lovely aide Stunner. Except things go awry when he finds himself freed not by his lover, but rather Kaine. His warnings ignored, the masked menace has chosen to take care of Doc Ock personally. And though the mighty octopus is a far, far superior threat than Grim Hunter was, he too isn't able to overcome the assault. And while Peter and Mary Jane celebrate the coming of new life, Stunner is left alone to grieve the loss of her one true love. Spider-Man's mightiest foe, Dr. Octopus, is dead. His slaying called out to the world no different than any other. His broken, mangled corpse left for all to see, branded by the mark of Kaine. Web of Death is an absolutely fantastic story that really manages to recontextualize one of the all-time greatest comic book rivalries in an entirely new and refreshing way. far more a story about Doc Ock than it is about Spidey. It builds the dynamic the two characters have had since the Lee Ditko era, in a wonderful new way that, despite the shocking end, would continue to be built upon in the later years. Stunner doesn't really find enough footing to establish herself, however, but since she's an almost literal accessory to Otto, it's not surprising. Kaine is still being built up well, even if his inclusion here is a bit more arbitrary than Web of Life, and with his growing obsession with Peter's life comes an equal level of worry for the newly reborn Spider-Man. Kaine's slaying of Doc Ock, however, is one of the first real missteps of the saga. Though hardly as controversial as the deaths that started this whole ordeal, fans weren't all too pleased with having one of the classic Lee Ditko era characters killed in a cheap stunt to build up a brand new mystery baddie. Even if the story itself was well received, and though Tom DeFalco is the man who pulled the trigger, he's ultimately not to blame, as Bob Budiansky, then boss of the Spider Books, insisted that Kaine take him down to build up his threat. DeFalco himself was reluctant to do so, but did his job as the writer and gave the mighty foe a worthy death. But Mary Jane's pregnancy is an idea he certainly supported, having pitched the idea early on in the pre-planning as one of the major inciting incidents for the saga story. And though there was far more potential controversy to be had with this idea, as the ultimate man in charge of Marvel at the time, he got what he wanted, so I suppose it's only fair he kill off Doc Ock. Whatever the case, we're really going places now. Spidey's back where he belongs, Scarlet's made a name for himself, and the parts of this grand machine are picking up in speed. And things are only going to get crazier from here on. Before the saga's plot moves on, there are two more side stories that come into play. First up was Unlimited number 8, a dreadfully mediocre and painfully irrelevant story, in which Spidey and Scarlet both independently swing in to take care of the embarrassingly bland Terror Unlimited, a group of solid gold, power-armored terrorists, in order to stop their grand scheme of blowing up the World Trade Center. Say, when did the story come out again? Jeez. Well, let's just hope someone doesn't try blowing them up for a third time. Anyways, it's a lazy story with lazy art and not much substance to it, though seeing the two spiders busting up baddies simultaneously is pretty cool, and they both get a couple of good quips in. And the final few pages have some great lines. But it's not worth slogging through 50 fucking pages of it just for that. Shortly after, in order to hammer in just how for sure serious and permanent Doc Ock's death was, a 3-issue miniseries began running entitled Funeral for an Octopus. Set shortly in the aftermath of Otto's funeral, with Spidey hot on the trail for his foe's killer, the story centers around the good doctor's cousin Elias. Ever stuck as his unwilling pawn, even in death, he's been sent a pre-recorded video wail from Otto, with a detailed scheme of revenge from beyond the grave, summoning the Sinister Four, to steal back the Doc's gear from the government following his death. Fortunately, with two spiders on the scene, taking down these cretins will be easier than ever. That is, unless Kaine has something to say about it. This story also has no significant impact on the saga, but does serve as a really good finale to both Web of Death and Doc Ock. While the plot is pretty bare bones, the short length means it doesn't wear out its welcome, and we get our focus primarily on our costumed characters beating the tar out of each other, which is wonderfully drawn, especially managing to highlight the differences between the two spiders in both fighting ability and mentality. Ock's cousin might not be a very interesting character, but having him as the primary villain, so to speak, works well for the plot, stuck as a go-between psychotic supervillains and the dead Doctor's grim wishes. And of course it goes without saying, but seeing Spidey use the Doc's octopus arms, even if for a short while, is absolutely wonderful. It really is the kind of dumb thing they do to give Dr. Octopus a final farewell. While it lacks an impact to the saga, it does manage to entertain, and for that it makes it worthwhile. We're finally heading into the big climax of Act 1, where things will really start picking up, and our conclusion is spread out across 3 different arcs all across the books. Our first foot into the deep end comes in Web 122, with Smoke and Mirrors, and if our cover is anything to go by, it's not much of a secret what's coming next. Things aren't exactly all sunshine and lollipops for our two Parkers, though Peter's finally solved all his hang-ups and come back from the brink of madness, and Ben's finally beginning to make a new life for himself in New York, despite his best efforts not to, this bliss will be short-lived, as the two are plagued by shared hallucinations of their mutual foe, the Jackal. Though Peter brushes them off as an after-effect of the virus, more intent to focus on his budding family-to-be, Benny Boy's not so calm-headed about it, strangely drawn on an instinctual level, far, far away from the city, but shockingly, not alone. The Jackal himself is there, waiting for Ben, taunting and hollering in his typical fashion. Or Perhaps not, as the self-christened Jack seems to just be a pint-sized lookalike, leading the spider down to a mysterious bunker door down the hillside. Literally, as it's nothing more than an illusion to trick him over the edge. Ben, immediately sick of this illusion bullshit, prepares to get some answers out of Jack the old-fashioned way. But before he turns the little creep into an oversized piñata, a hulking monster of man with bulging gray veins storms out towards him. Peter, meanwhile, is down at the bugle, letting Robbie know about the big news, mostly for insurance money, and happily bounces on out of there. The only happy one there today, it seems, as Jameson gets out of a meeting with Lieutenant Raven at the same time, and Jonah is far less jolly than usual. But we'll have to wait to find out why, as Peter's own joy is cut short when the visions of the Jackal start flaring up, far worse than before. Lieutenant Raven tries to give Peter a hand out, but he's rebuffed, much to his annoyed suspicion. After a quick stop with MJ at the hospital, hoping against all hope that Aunt May wakes up, which she very much seems to for a brief second, we return to Ben getting the tar smacked out of him by Mr. Muscle here, as Jack dances on the sidelines. And far off in the distance, the duel is observed by, as if I need to tell you, Kaine. Though the Scarlet Spider puts up a valiant effort, the mysterious Guardian is too much for him, knocked out cold and left abandoned in the snow, as Jack and his big pal wait for the other spider to make his way there. Which he very much is, as while lost in thought about what the mysterious flashes of ancient memories of his and his clone mean, and fearing the worst, Spidey gets a sudden flash of Ben's battered body deep in the woods, and realizing this is more than a memory, he sets off to rescue his clone brother. Chapter 2 picks up with Kaine choosing now to claim his ill-defined vengeance on Ben, until he's stopped by our other shadowy mystery villain, Scryer, chiding him for his obsession before quickly departing. Kaine immediately starts shitting bricks, fully aware of what Scryer's really capable of and freaking out about the implications of his involvement. Naturally, before Kaine actually explains what the hell Scryer's deal is, our friendly neighborhood exposition interrupter arrives and scaring the mean machine back into the shadows. Spidey rouses Scarlet from his snowy slumber, and after figuring out they're stuck in the same boat, as well as engaging in some friendly banter, Jack pops back in to throw out his own taunting, and our twin spiders team up to get to the bottom of all this shit. The two begin monologuing, Spidey about how he knew Ben was the Scarlet Spider and was fully content to leave him be until this business with the Jackal came tearing into their lives, and Scarlet showing that despite everything, a part of him is upset Peter's put his life back together, even though he knows it could never be his own. The two find a mysterious metal door in their chase, a real one this time, and behind it waits Jack grinning like a madman. Scarlet's ready to snap the little brat like a twig, too fixated on him to realize they've just fallen into a trap. Jack, of course, was counting on this, leading the two spiders deeper into the complex where he, and, as he claims, the two spiders were created, bringing them to a massive machine, which he claims the real Jackal is inside. Spider-Man is shocked at this to learn of Warren's supposed survival, but Jack's info dumping gets cut short by Guardians screaming for blood, but only his own, shouting in pain and cursing the Jackal as he slowly collapses in agony, dying on the floor as Jack breaks his ridiculous persona and warns his accomplice. Jack unmasks, revealing that both he and the Guardian were also clones of Peter, though thoroughly deformed, and warns the two spiders that this grim fate awaits them all as genetic playthings. But the morning is cut short, as the massive pod in the center of the room bursts open, and from the rolling smoke emerges the one true Jackal.
Good grief, he's naked!
The all-new, all-different Jackal quickly dispatches the two Spider-Men, ranting and raving about all sorts of nonsense, but quickly changes his attention to a far more important task, putting some fucking clothes on. Now decked out in the year's best fashion, the Jackal reveals he doesn't really want to fight, more just testing out his new abilities. See, against all odds and expectations, he is the real Miles Warren, having secretly sent a clone of himself to the duel at Shea Stadium all those years ago as he prepped to completely rebuild himself at the genetic level. And after 5 long years, he was ready, calling the two Spider-Men to him subconsciously, branding the two as his sons. Spidey's finally lost his patience and gives the Jackal exactly what he deserves, but Scarlet stops him. As infuriating as the Jackal is, he's the only one who can give any of us an explanation to what's going on here. And explain he does, as their combined foe leads them deeper into the lab. His mad ramblings make it clear to them both that Ben wasn't the only clone Warren made, though try as he might, many of his clones were doomed to slow, degenerative deaths. But not all of them, and confronted with a similar pod like before, the Jackal drops a major bombshell. Both Ben and Peter are clones, and the real Peter Parker has been on ice this whole time. Spidey naturally isn't buying what Warren is selling, and this time isn't willing to play nice with Ben and listen patiently. Ben responds in kind by calling Peter a coward, but his bluff gets called with a demand that Jackal cut the games and show them the proof, and the Jackal obliges, only for this to have been yet another of his tricks. The real Peter wasn't inside, but instead, Gwen Stacy. Chapter 3 picks up right away, with our two Spiders in severe shock over who Jackal claims to be the real Gwen Stacy, and Spidey chooses the simpler trauma response of just beating the tar out of the Jackal until Gwen convinces him to stop fighting. Scarlet, on the other hand, isn't so easily convinced, choosing instead to settle things with a mature chat with Warren, and he seems more than enthused by this. After the Jackal segues us to the hospital, Aunt May's mind returning for just the briefest of moments, he and Ben sit down for a nice little chat about their lives, as Spidey and Gwen's chat goes sour. Rejecting the woman claiming to be Gwen, Spidey has finally reached his breaking point and decides he's quitting the Jackal's mad mind games for good, trashing the lab in an attempt to escape. Watching this frenzied tantrum, the Jackal only feels shame for the man called Spider-Man, telling Ben that this whole mad battle between him and Peter Parker was all a ridiculous waste of time, cutting to the point and telling Ben that he is the real Peter Parker and not the clone. Ben, naturally skeptical, presses Jackal on this, who further reveals that he not only helped fake Ben's death that fateful night, but also was the one to pull him from the smokestack, having given him false memories to ensure he'd think he was the clone, to ensure he'd stay away from his better half. And what's more, he has a good reason to reveal all this, wanting to give Ben the chance to dispose of his clone once and for all, and retake his life for good. All the while this transaction of fate is observed from on high by Kaine, desperate to intervene, but finding himself unable to do so, and Kaine himself is observed from higher on by Scryer. Ben, however, ain't biting on this bait, and after his sidekick is just ever so slightly too annoying, the Jackal begins lashing out, deciding that he's just gonna kill Ben and be done with it. Ben, unable to fight back thanks to some post-hypnotic commands Warren placed on him at some point. Spidey, though, has no such restrictions, cold clocking the Jackal and snapping Ben back to reality. A greater beatdown coming, Jackal scrambles to drop the facade and says he was just fucking around. Ben actually is the clone and not Peter, as we all knew, and he just lied for no better reason than he thought it was funny. Spidey comes up with a better idea, throttling the Jackal within an inch of his life until he shuts the fuck up and tells him the truth. Jackal tries to further goad the two on with his childish taunting, and Peter is finally, officially, sick of the Jackal's bullshit lies. And it's now, after all we've been through, that we finally actually get an answer to the single biggest question we've been left with since the beginning of the Clone Saga. Spidey pins Jackal up against the wall and tells him in no uncertain terms that, thanks to his own journals and the High Evolutionary's research, Spidey is painfully aware Warren was nothing but a bullshit artist. He's never cloned anyone, and Ben and Gwen were nothing more than innocent bystanders, transformed by a madman for his petty revenge. But the Jackal counters this revelation with one of his own, and the real truth is, the High Evolutionary lied. No, seriously, that's it. That is the entire extent of how the writers justified the Clone Saga happening. The High Evolutionary lied about the clones being fake. So right about now, you're probably asking a few questions along the lines of, fucking why? What benefit does this serve the High Evolutionary? How does the Jackal know this? Who the hell are you? Get out of my house! But the writers sure as hell aren't interested in answering that, so neither am I. The Jackal assures Peter he really is the real Spider-Man, and tries goading him into taking Gwen and going on his way. But Spidey's finally managed to bury the specter of Gwen Stacy and firmly rejects her. Whether she's real or not, it doesn't matter. His life is his own, not what someone else makes it for him. Perhaps a wise choice, as Gwen begins degenerating shortly afterwards, dying a quick yet agonizing death as her body falls apart. Yet again, another cruel joke from the Jackal. The Spiders get ready to tear him apart, but the Jackal manages to stall them just long enough to escape, declaring that he really was telling the truth the first time, and neither Spider is the real Peter Parker, setting his labs self-destruct with one last tease of the truth. Though the Spiders refuse to let him escape, Jack, having a change of heart due to the Gwen clone's death, leads them to the exit and their freedom, though he's denied the flames of redemption, as Warren snags him just in time. In the cold snow amid the smoldering ruins of the lab, the two Spiders are left more confused than harmed. Though Spidey suggests that they could find a solution to the clone degeneration, it would mean proving for sure what the Jackal said that night, and neither man wants to upset the status quo, parting ways in the cold of night. Watched from afar by the Jackal, who's being watched from afar by Kaine, who's being watched by afar by Scryer, who's being watched by afar by us. And the issue ends with one final tease. Deep within the ruins of the Jackal's lab lies a single pod, untouched and unopened, its contents a mystery. I'm somewhat conflicted on Smoke and Mirrors, but overall I'd say it's alright. It has a solid build-up with the Spiders being subconsciously guided by shared memories, but once the Jackal himself appears, it starts to fall apart. The Jackal has been given a near entirely new personality, and not for the better. In the original saga, Warren was smart, conniving, cruel. His schemes all played into a greater purpose, his every action and every word carefully crafted to deceive everyone, even himself. And though he's looked like a clown, he took himself seriously to deadly effect. And with his resurgence, the Jackal's become a quick-talking, snarky edgelord, randomly spouting pop culture references or painful, self-aware meta-commentary. His schemes, so far, boiling down to throwing shit at the wall just to fuck with Spider-Man for no long-term gain. While he wasn't an amazing top-tier threat to our heroes, he was at least a unique villain beforehand. But now he's basically just a dollar store Joker copy, without the fashion sense to match. That being said, I do like the idea of having Warren seed doubts in the mind of the Spiders regarding which one is the real Peter Parker, if at all, but it gets too dragged out with shtick to have a solid payoff. Having deformed clones act as his servants is also a cool idea, even if Jack is twice as annoying, and does fit the Jackal well. Overall, while the first arc isn't quite over yet, everything's being set up to move into the next phase of the saga. Not just for the Spiders, but our mystery villains too, even if we still don't have any good reason to care about Scarlet yet. Granted, we're still left with the massive headache that is the Evolutionary War retcon, yet to be properly resolved. While Mackie is predominantly to blame for this, it's Greenberg and Bernardo's fault it came up in the first place, feeling that the story was too recent to ignore, and pushed the Spider office to get it addressed, with Mackie being the unlucky sap forced to resolve it. Not that he actually did resolve the goddamn story, or leave anyone else a satisfying way to do so, but that's just typical for Mackie now, isn't it? Whatever the case, it's at least one less headache to worry about for the time being. The conclusion to the saga's first arc begins with the two-part story, Players and Pawns, a shorter plot which leads into the arc's climax in ASM 400. Alongside the release of these issues, Marvel put out a one-shot entitled The Clone Journal, a Cliff Notes plot recap of the saga's storyline up to that point, focusing on Ben's perspective, near entirely consisting of recycled, out-of-context pages from various issues slapped together with new narration on top. It's irrelevant, as the narration doesn't provide any new or important context we don't already have at this point, and the lack of new art doesn't help either. Onto the real story, Players and Pawns isn't the highest stake plot we've had so far, but still carries dire consequences, as our two Spiders struggle to return to their status quo following the distressing revelations of the previous arc. But with the Jackal back in action, this is easier said than done. And what of the mysterious pod we left off on? Well, on that note, we won't have to wait long, as Chapter 1 picks up amid the ruins of the Jackal's lab, with ya boy, Kaine, ransacking the lab in search of something only Warren can provide. Undeniable proof of who is the true Peter Parker or not. But that data becomes more questionable when he accidentally activates the pod, revealing that the Jackal was, in some way, telling the truth. Contained within is none other than Peter Parker. And as luck would have it, the Jackal was waiting on the sidelines for this moment as well. Surprising no one at this point, both Kaine and the Jackal seem to know each other well, and their relationship ain't sunshine and rainbows when the two leap into combat. Jackal, as always, is trying to mess with his foe by sowing doubt over his records, leading to Kaine choosing the time-honored tradition of beating the information out of the villain instead. The fight doesn't last long though. As Jack is plotting to double-cross Warren, Scryer suddenly appears from the shadows to interrupt the duel, buying Kaine time to bail, as well as the other Peter who beat him to the door. Scryer is basically just here to waste our time, popping in to say hi now that the Jackal is back, the two, of course, already knowing each other for mysterious reasons, then leaving just as quickly, leaving the Jackal, and the reader, more annoyed than anything as they clear out the lab and head out to their new secret lair. From here, the narrative splits a bit, while Ben, lost in thought over the Jackal's words, is again living vicariously through Peter's past by checking in on Flash Thompson, currently working as a gym teacher. Kaine rushes out to stop the third Peter and prove for sure who the original is, yet still plagued by visions of Mary Jane's death, a somewhat more reasonable fate as MJ receives news of a startling anomaly developing with the child. As the Jackal makes himself comfortable in his new home, he's decided to kill time while his greater schemes develop to engage in some pointless, petty supervillainy, and Peter is struggling to return to routine and get back to working at the Bugle. A search further complicated when Jonah tells him about a certain detective asking about Peter, and a stranger named Ben Reilly, and said detective is fast on the move, obtaining an arrest warrant for someone, that we don't know who. But after Jonah's warning, we can make an educated guess on who that might be. Peter's on the same track here too, coming to the conclusion that he really doesn't know Ben as well as he should. 5 years is a long time for a radioactive spider person to get into trouble, and Peter can only hope Ben isn't the one really responsible for the recent killings in town. And who else would decide the worst possible moment to do a good deed but our buddy Kaine, dumping the Jackal's documents in his hands and running off into the night, assuring Peter that he is, without doubt, the one true Peter Parker. Peter, unsurprisingly, finds a 7-foot-tall bodybuilder in black spandex and a cape dumping a manila folder with paperwork saying that he's definitely for sure not a clone, despite never once considering the possibility otherwise, despite the Jackal's boasting, to be incredibly suspicious, and concludes the masked mystery is another pawn of the Jackal, continuing his chaotic scheme. And speaking of, Ben's found Flash to be a good inspiration for his own quest to build himself a new life, only for the Jackal to arrive and wreak havoc for no real good reason, unleashing a bizarre genetic hybrid to terrorize Flash and the kids. Ben suits up and heads in to stop the Jackal, and at the same time, so has Peter, chasing down Kaine, who realizes too late that he's accidentally aided the Jackal's mad schemes by handing over the documents. And now he's got to deal with Spider-Man, who's swung on in, looking for the cold, hard truth of the matter. And all the while, our third Peter is slowly, but surely, making his way back to the city, with not a single memory of who he is, beyond a nagging sense of responsibility guiding him forward. Chapter 2 keeps the momentum going, with Scarlet squaring off against the Jackal, and Spidey doing likewise with Kaine. As Scarlet faces down the Jackal's monsters, finding them more for show than anything, deteriorating from a single punch, Flash races to save the kids from the villain's wrath. And though he'd rather be helping the web-slinger fight, his quick work earns him respect from Ben, who naturally is unfamiliar with the one-time bully's personal growth over the years. Warren, literally, tosses Jack in as a distraction, though the madman's own monsters are more interested in him than the Scarlet Spider is. Nevertheless, the wall crawler rescues his demented duplicate, exactly as the Jackal expected, backstabbing Scarlet in the process. After a quick check-in on the third Parker, lost and confused at some random truck stop, we move our focus to Spidey's battle with Kaine. All 10 seconds of it as Kaine effortlessly subdues our friendly neighborhood jobber, running off to parts unknown. Fortunately, our other spider fares better, and with the civilians safe, Scarlet cuts loose and puts Jackal down for the count clean. With the cops arriving to clean up, the Jackal's magnificent return is cut short, with a one-way trip to Ravencroft. Or so we think, as Warren totally wanted to go there in the first place and has just let himself get arrested, but our hero won't get a chance to get any answers out of Warren. But he does have a chance with Jack, easily caught trying to flee the scene. Rather than fight it out, Jack is willing to make a deal, offering Ben a hard copy of the Jackal's files, but not the same ones Kaine obtained earlier, as Jack claims his data proves Ben is the original and not Peter. Of course, he won't get a chance to elaborate on its contents any further, and with a snap of Warren's fingers, Jack's degeneration kicks into overdrive, melting on the spot, leaving Ben to only ponder his words. Needing time to ponder this revelation, Ben makes a trip to the famous smokestacks, once meant to be his grave, left alone with only his thoughts and the Jackal's data. Faced with the potential proof of his existence, Ben wonders if Peter ever found himself in a similar predicament, his entire life reduced to a single object. Though we know the answer for sure, and how Peter responded to it, Benny Boy decides that it's up to him to decide what to do with his miracle answer. And though he doesn't know it, he makes the same choice as his duplicate did, tossing the Jackal's data disk into the ocean, simply stating that whoever he is, one way or the other, he's not Peter Parker anymore, and no longer needs validation of who or what he is. His past is his own, and life is in the living. But while Ben's figured out who he is, the third Parker is still struggling to answer the same question. His own problems exacerbated when he discovers his incredible spider strength by impulse. And as Detective Raven hits a roadblock with his warrant, there's one last surprise for us. Aunt May has finally woken up. The only thing she wants more than anything is her wonderful nephew. While Players and Pawns is a rather short story, it doesn't feel rushed. Indeed, the way it shows all the plot lines at work is befitting the name of the story, and it carries on the Jackal's manipulations in a reasonable way to keep the next act of the saga going, for both of our spiders. The Jackal's actual scheme is a gigantic waste of time, however, both in story and out of it, and would have worked better if it was Ben facing off with some random supervillain the Jackal pushed into fighting him. After all, that was the Jackal's whole shtick back in the original saga. And to that end, I wish Ben got more time to spend with Flash. Having had major interactions with most of Peter's old-school sidecasts so far, he gets shafted in favor of more Jackal shenanigans. Similarly, I wish Spidey and Kaine's duel had more focus on it. Not that I think Spidey should have won, mind you, I'm still fine with how it ends, but this is the first time the two have met since Kaine arrived, and they barely get any time to interact. And, as irritating as Jack is, I'm sad to see him go. It seems like they were trying to build up to a face turn that never quite manages to make it, though his send-off manages to make an impact nonetheless. Speaking of other Parkers, the third Peter subplot so far fails to make any real impact. While I can't fault the Spider Office for trying to shake things up like this, there's no reason anyone older than 6 would believe that this guy, who hasn't been mentioned or foreshadowed once before now, is actually the real Peter Parker, and neither of our Spider-Men are the real one. Most especially because the Jackal has been proven to be entirely untrustworthy so far. But we'll have to wait and see whether or not it stays that way going forward. Whatever the case, everyone's now exactly where they need to be, and we reach the finale of the saga's first arc, which promises to change everything drastically. ASM 400, featuring the, wait, hold on, that doesn't look right. That cover is way too nice looking. Yeah, there we go, that's more like it. Yes, folks, rather infamously, ASM 400 shipped with a special gimmick cover variant, in which the tombstone drawing is replaced by a thicker, more detailed cover stock, sporting an embossed texturing, intended to resemble an actual tombstone that's been chiseled out to sport the cover's images. However, due to either the printers fucking up or Marvel just not caring in the slightest, the embossment was done way too lightly, resulting in the detail being nearly non-existent and the cover entirely illegible under most circumstances. And just in case you think this is a fluke of the scan, I actually have a copy of it myself to show you. Seriously, I don't know how the hell this made it to store shelves in this condition, even I don't give this little of a fuck. Covers aside, our story, The Gift, picks up right where we left off, with Peter rushing to the hospital after hearing the wonderful news. Aunt May has finally woken up from her coma, and is as happy to see her nephew Peter as Peter is to see her. Though the doctor is a bit skeptical of her condition, May ain't putting up with this hospital shit no more, demanding that she be let out and sent back home. Peter is more focused on something else, the Scarlet Spider slinking on in, having also come to check in on May. Naturally, Peter's not that happy, and who could blame him? Certainly not Ben, fully aware that it's a terrible idea and wisely deciding to bail before things get worse for her. But not for him, as with Aunt May back in full health, Ben contemplates everything that's gone on the last few weeks. He only came here because of her condition, and even though he's been building something stable for himself, now that May is stable herself, he doesn't have any reason to stay in town, right? But he'll need some time to work things out for himself. And after a quick check-in with the Jackal, who's busy gaslighting some poor security guard into believing he's totally not a gibbering lunatic, May and Peter finally return home after a long-held absence. As Aunt May's memories begin racing, MJ races in to congratulate her recovery, only for May to turn it around and congratulating her and Peter on their child-to-be. As May begins reminiscing on Peter's parents, Peter's own joy gets interrupted when Ben arrives at the Parker house to talk. Ben begins waxing nostalgically about his, or rather Peter's childhood at the house, but Peter, who for some reason decided to suit up, isn't in the mood for it. Cutting the history lesson short, Ben declares that he's decided to leave the city, much to Peter's surprise. With May back in perfect health and his family about to expand, Ben is nothing more than a loose end, and even with the Jackal a looming threat, Ben decides it doesn't matter. Whoever he used to be is less important than who he is now, and crawling back to a life that may or may not be his would be pointless. The two part ways amicably, and though Peter attempts to leave things off on a high note, Ben makes it clear that he intends to leave for good this time. As Aunt May and MJ share some wise insight on their lives, Peter's got his head buried deep in old family photos, trying to relive his childhood vicariously through them. Unfortunately, he's having a hard time of it, as he finds the gaps in his memories far too suspicious considering current circumstances, struggling to put the clone affair behind him. MJ does her best to reassure Peter, mirroring Ben's own words about the affair, and trying to get her wonderful nutcase of a husband to accept that he's the real Peter Parker no matter what. Of course, while the two are content the clone nightmare is over, things aren't entirely over for Peter, as Judas Traveler is back in town and eager to recommence his study of the wall crawler. While Ben is busy packing his bags, struggling to make that final step out the door, reminding himself of the words of a mysterious dead woman named Janine, who seems to have great significance to him, the third Parker's problems are only getting worse when an encounter with a rather overeager cop goes sour upon discovering his latent spider powers. But that's his problem to deal with, not ours. Jumping ahead a week, and things have settled back into normalcy with Peter and Aunt May. And despite his protests, she's talked her wonderful nephew into a day on the town, taking a trip up to the top of the Empire State Building, much like they did in his youth, reminiscing on how much Uncle Ben loved the place. But normalcy has gone out the window today, when Aunt May drops a bombshell on Peter by revealing she knows he's Spider-Man, and has known for quite some time. Her past hatred of the wall crawler's antics, fueled by her worry for her dear nephew, she could never force herself to admit the truth to him, or herself, to keep herself distant from the danger he got into. Peter is, of course, dumbfounded by this reveal, scrambling to make excuses for himself, but May doesn't care. Her nephew is one of the kindest, bravest souls she's ever known, and is confident that if he were still around, Uncle Ben would be as proud of what Peter's become as she is. Of course, the day can't end so wonderfully. Almost immediately after admitting the truth to Peter, May's strength fades fast, and back at the Parker home, Peter's rushed to get a doctor to come over. But it's not worth the effort. May is painfully aware that this past week was a miraculous gift given to her to make her peace with her nephew and the world. She's fought for a long time, and as much as it pains her to admit it, that time is up. As Peter fights his tears, he shares one last story with his dear aunt, with Ben and MJ watching on, discussing his out-of-body meeting with her from earlier in the saga, how she gave words of wisdom to her nephew when he needed them the most. He shares those same words with his aunt now, and with a tearful quote from Peter Pan, the words are heeded, and Aunt May quietly and peacefully passes away, surrounded by her family. The funeral comes quickly, a small, understated affair attended by Peter's family and closest friends, as Aunt May is laid to rest next to her loving husband. And slowly, but surely, the gravesite is vacated, leaving Ben to be the final soul left to mourn over May. A backup story in the issue, taking place shortly after, comes from Stan Lee himself, one personal eulogy for May, as Peter recounts a tale of his wonderful aunt from his youth, unbothered by the world around him as he recalls May's kind generosity when he was at his weakest. Of course, the after-party is anything but quiet, as Peter finds himself wandering through his thoughts between words of condolence, his thoughts drifting from his warm memories of Aunt May more over to what Ben told him during their last goodbye. But he's quickly snapped back to reality with a surprise he could have never seen coming. Detective Raven awaits Peter at the door, and as I'm sure you already guessed by now, the warrant he's been pursuing was for Peter, arresting him for the lengthy spree of murders he's been investigating. MJ's desperate protests fall on deaf ears, and as Peter's carted off to prison, she's begun panicking over what to do. And the issue ends with someone else making the decision for her, as Ben enters the Parker home to finally introduce himself to Mary Jane, unmasking himself in the process. With that, ASM 400 and Act 1 of the saga conclude. Aunt May's death had been a long time coming in the saga, having been planned since the beginning of the whole ordeal. The decision made by the Spider offices to have May pass away had, in many ways, been the same incentive to kill Gwen, seeing that all potential had been conceivably exhausted with her, and it was a significant enough change to status quo to hallmark a major milestone. While the Spider office wasn't entirely unified on this idea, the execution was very well received, though fans were a bit more divided on the idea overall. Stan Lee, in typical Stan fashion, had been very receptive to the idea initially. After all, he wrote a story for the issue. But when fan support proved to be less than universal, he changed his tune quick. Still, I personally would agree with the powers that be. By this point in time, having May pass away was a natural conclusion to affairs, and though she was a major figure in Spider-Man's mythos, there's only so many times you can really use the Aunt May is sick and in the hospital card over the years. Really, it's just the strong writing of the issue that carries it. In an alternate timeline, I could see this issue being pretty badly handled and make the entire emotional climax be a punchline more than anything else, so props to the Spider Office for sticking the landing. Though it's evident that the saga wasn't going to be over and done with by ASM 400 as was initially planned, things are starting to show the warning signs of what's to come. Sales had been skyrocketing since the clones' return, as intended, and it's already obvious Marvel is letting the cash go to their heads, choosing to extend the saga more and more beyond its original scope. Things haven't quite hit a breaking point yet, but the cracks in Spider-Man's facade are becoming more evident. As things are, the opening act of the saga is quite strong, reverting some of the more questionable recent alterations to Spider-Man's status quo and quickly re-establishing the clone into a complex, engaging character. While not every new introduction is of the same quality, it's immediately evident why the saga sold as well as it did. Though, I feel it goes without saying, but we're only scratching the surface so far. Running alongside the next few issues was another backup story entitled The Parker Legacy, a sequel to Birth of a Spider-Man from Act 1, picking up right where that story left off. In it, we find out the immediate aftermath of the original saga. The Spider clone, having speed-run the cycles of grief, ultimately accepts his fate. stealing some clothes and emergency cash from his original source, and, despite some struggle, hops on a bus to California, looking to distance himself completely from Peter Parker, both physically, mentally, and morally. But after a drunken stupor leads to the clone convincing a poor man down on his luck to take the Bud Dwyer special, then later convincing him to not do that, this gives the clone a much-needed epiphany, giving life a second chance with a new name, Ben Reilly. Though as he freely admits, the next 5 years won't be easy for him, and hints that he'll only get worse before he gets to where we know him in the present, for now, he's secure that regardless of who he is, the Parker legacy will live on in his spirit. It's a short and sweet story. While not the most significant plot-wise, it really does cut to the heart of what makes Ben work so well. Despite his tragic origin, he won't compromise on his morals. Whether they were his to start with or not, it doesn't matter. All that matters is doing the right thing. Act 2 begins in earnest at SM57, with the two-part story Aftershocks. Both issues of Aftershocks were released with actually really cool gimmick covers, with a die-cut outer cover obscuring a second cover beneath it. Picking up right after the cliffhanger in Act 1, and Mary Jane is less than enthusiastic with Benny Boy's proposal to help. Peter, meanwhile, is still reeling from the shock of it all, unable to fully process what's happening to him and why, even as he sits in a jail cell with his future crumbling around him. Though Detective Raven is more than eager to prod Parker, the wall crawler's not too keen to engage. Things begin moving fast from here. After a quick check-in at the Bugle, currently burning down over the news about Peter, with Jonah his usual cheerful self when it comes to passing on the news, at least publicly, as we find out that he's privately planning to fund Peter's legal defenses, we see the different players moving along. While the third Parker marches through the rain-soaked streets looking for an answer, Peter is doing the same cooped up in a cell, absent-mindedly sitting through his defense strategy. While Detective Raven has found Peter's behavior odd, begins to doubt his conviction. All the while, the busy streets of New York are watched from the shadows on high, observed by the ever-vigilant eye of, you guessed it, Frank Stallone. Kaine. Kaine, furious at Peter's incarceration, begins to plot, and with another vision of Mary Jane's death, he's made a decision, not just for Peter's future, but his own. Mary Jane, meanwhile, is worried about the future of her child, panicking over the potential damage Peter's radioactive blood could have on the two. And dear me oh my, if only there was someone who could offer her help right now. As the Jackal continues to play the mad loon at Ravencroft, the third Parker begins recalling a lesson of power and responsibility when a wayward mugger crosses his path. Meanwhile, the Scarlet Spider is keeping a close eye on Mary Jane, debating whether or not he should try and offer her a helping hand after being so rudely rejected earlier. But unfortunately, he's beaten to the punch, as Mary Jane has crossed paths with Judas Traveler, eager to resume his research through Spider-Man's lovely bride. And what rotten luck this has to happen now, as Detective Raven's growing doubt has pushed him to visit the Parker residence for more information on his culprit-to-be. But the only person he finds home is Kaine, who triumphantly declares that Raven has arrested the wrong man. Raven, understandably, isn't exactly willing to debate murder evidence with a costumed lunatic, but unfortunately he's currently in the costumed lunatic city, so that's not going to work for him. And Kaine gives him all the evidence he needs to prove Parker's innocence, branding the detective with the same mark like all his other victims, as he scampers off into the night. Meanwhile, the Scarlet Spider attempts to keep Mary Jane out of Traveler's myths, and to keep him busy, Traveler detonates the entire city block. What? He could do that? Like the whole time, he could just casually explode huge chunks of the city? What the fuck is this dude doing beefing with Spider-Man of all people if he's at this tier of power? Even Ben is surprised at this, questioning the sheer gap in power compared to his, or rather, Peter's, classic rogues gallery. Though, despite this, as Traveler continues to demolish the city by sheer force of will, the Scarlet Spider keeps up with the Mad Doctor, surprising Mary Jane with his tenacity despite Traveler's protests. But even with Traveler's incredibly inexplicable might, he's unable to keep the Scarlet Spider from catching up to him and MJ, and gives him one last chance to back down and leave Mary Jane to him. And as Ben steadfastly refuses to give in, he willingly, though begrudgingly, leaves Ben and Mary Jane to their own devices. But not for the last time. The Scarlet Spider prepares to go on his lonesome once more, but Mary Jane finally accepts the help of her husband's clone in the coming crisis, as our other Parkers prepare for the next steps of their journeys, and the Jackal schemes in his cell. Chapter 2 jumps all around narratively, so just bear with me as we go. We pick up with the Jackal still pretending like he's pretending to be a lunatic, as Kafka and Jameson leave him to his devices. briefly stopping in on another prisoner, Shriek, who's gone mad following her absorption of the carrion virus and has begun believing the virus to be a child she's carrying. Meanwhile, as Ben is hanging out at the Parker residence, taking the time to catch up Mary Jane on his whole deal as Peter chats with Robertson, finding himself unable to admit the truth of his situation to his longtime friend despite the grim fate that awaits him. And while Detective Raven recovers from his attack, now fully convinced that despite his prior evidence that Peter is innocent, the third Parker finds a newspaper detailing Peter's case. And though he doesn't recognize the name, he recognizes that the man in the image is himself. There's a minor continuity error here as the narrator states that it's only been 24 hours since this Parker awoke in the Jackal's lab during the previous story, despite nearly 2 weeks having passed in the main story's perspective, meaning that either the scenes of the third Parker have been shown to us in asynchronous order, or that this has been the single worst day in Peter Parker's entire goddamned life. A bit later, aware that Peter's radioactive blood may potentially be hazardous to her for obvious reasons, Ben offers to take Mary Jane to see Dr. Traynor and get the two checked up. But MJ, having been told earlier of a potential anomaly with the child, takes this offer the wrong way and freaks out, demanding to know why Ben's so keen on helping her and Peter despite their previous animosity. And while that fight brews, another more violent fight is brewing. Alone in his thoughts in a cold, dark cell, Peter concludes that Ben must be the real killer Raven is hunting for, resulting in a brief dream sequence wherein he busts out of jail to capture Ben and turn him in to exonerate himself, all the while debating his own strategy, and once he concludes that incriminating Ben would only result in his identity as Spider-Man being exposed, he resigns himself to his fate, and though it pains him greatly, he chooses to make the responsible choice and wait for the legal system to do what it must. But while Peter is cooped up in the cell, sadly the same can't be said for the Jackal, having busted free from his bonds and raking the security systems to think otherwise, deciding to take some time out for a little midnight reading, primarily Ravencroft's patient records, to try and find out why Traveler attacked the asylum earlier, stopping by pure luck on the files of our old pal, Malcolm McBride. As the third Parker continues his blind wanderings, he stumbles upon a decrepit warehouse, the same warehouse where many years ago Spider-Man apprehended his uncle's killer. And though he doesn't know why, he recognizes its significance and now knows exactly where he needs to go. This epiphany observed from afar by the sinister gaze of it's Scarlet this time. While this revelation strikes the other Parker, Ben explains to Mary Jane why he's so invested in helping. Despite his prior animosity of Peter for the life he should have, he has finally accepted the reality of his situation, and as he's living on borrowed time due to inevitable cellular degeneration, he's resolved himself to help at least one Peter Parker have a happy life. Meanwhile, back at Ravencroft, the Jackal has discovered that the carrion virus is within the asylum, breaking into Shriek's cell to take it back by force. The Jackal explains, for the sake of the audience and really no one else, that the carrion virus was designed to institute instantaneous cellular degeneration in its host, much the same as an ordinary clone would go through, and finds it may be useful for his ultimate plan, the complete genetic recreation of the human race under his own twisted design. Note that this revelation still doesn't explain the blatantly superhuman abilities the virus gave its last hosts, nor do we still not know who the fuck the first carrion was. But hey, I guess we have that whole Shriek has the carrion virus cliffhanger resolved because that was really vital to bring back, now wasn't it? With the virus back in his control, the Jackal's business at Ravencroft is done, and he makes his escape, taunting Carnage on his way out for good measure. And as Peter stares longingly at the moonlit sky, debating whether or not Ben could really be the killer the place we're looking for, the story ends with the third Parker making his way to the graves of Uncle Ben and Aunt May. And with his arrival, his mind is flooded with memories upon memories, finally coming to realize who he truly is. And his next stop is to reconnect with his wife, Mary Jane. Unfortunate for him, as both Ben and Kaine have her under close watch. Aftershocks is really where the weaknesses of the saga begin to form. A disjointed focus on a handful of different story tangents with no real direct focus, seemingly more interested in setting up the next big moment than it is paying off what's already going on. What should largely focus on Peter's arrest instead speeds through much of the initial setup for it to focus on what everyone else is doing. Peter as a character also starts backsliding, falling back into the edgy, grimdark loser he started this saga off as, even though present scenario excuses said behavior, that doesn't make it better. And while the third Parker storyline has finally actually gone somewhere, where it's looking to go is only making things worse for us. Meanwhile, Kaine's actions across the arc, while minimal, are kind of stupid as hell and make the big guy look like a complete dope. You'd think someone with precognitive abilities would be able to think more than 10 seconds ahead with his actions, but who am I to judge? Likewise, Traveler's Return really doesn't do any better job of making him fit into the Spider books than his first outing. If anything, his new absurdly high power level soundly takes him out of Spidey's weight class with no greater understanding of who the fuck he is or why he's so laser focused on Spider-Man. It's become clear that he was pretty much just introduced to have a mysterious bad guy to draw in readers, without actually having a solution to the mystery, a tactic already worn well past its welcome by this point, carried entirely by his design more than anything. And on top of all of that, the Jackal's time in Ravencroft, along with the reintroduction yet complete non-revelation of the carrion virus, is entirely ingenuine, thrown in solely to get the Jackal out of the way for a while so he can resolve a lingering plot thread. This is pretty much admitted to by Greenberg, as the virus plotline was reincorporated basically just because they felt they had to address it alongside the Evolutionary War retcons from earlier, due to its direct link to the original saga. Again, not that they really address it at all, but at least it's here. The entire arc basically all amounts to setting up the future status quo, resulting in the story spinning its wheels and wasting our time here and now. But our next storyline would be our longest so far, with the 5-part Mark of Kaine. All our main players are making their moves. As Peter's trial unfolds in a sensational fashion, Mary Jane is struggling with the uncertain future of her child, with Ben sticking close by. And while the third Parker's quest for answers is quickly converging on the two Spiders, Kaine is finally set to make his move, certain that whatever potential abnormality is affecting Mary Jane's child will fulfill his bizarre premonitions of her death. Trainer's tests prove to be inconclusive at the moment, so Mary Jane leaves the good doctor to his work, but sadly alone, as Trainer keeps Ben behind to run some tests on our favorite clone. Peter is struggling in jail, finding it impossible to keep calm, not helped when a fire suddenly breaks out in the cell block, where even saving the life of a fellow inmate just feels like a waste of time for Peter. The Bugle is struggling as well. A fierce debate between Jonah and Robbie rages on. Jonah unwilling to report further on Peter's trial despite protests otherwise, and he can't quite find it in him to admit it's personal. Mary Jane, meanwhile, gets no peace this night either, as Kaine's chosen to strike, snatching her off the streets down to the sewers below. While this goes on, Detective Raven's mind is still racing in doubt. Though unable to accept Peter's innocence, he's certain he's not the real killer, and it seems that Stunner agrees, back in town to give Raven a helping hand in catching the man who killed Doc Ock, for her own personal gain. Down in the sewers, Kaine tries to warn Mary Jane of her fate in his usual fashion, unsurprisingly doing nothing but scaring the shit out of MJ, and though she escapes the madman Kaine, her nightmare's not over yet, crossing paths with a third Parker on her way back home. Chapter 2 continues the meeting, with the third Parker trying to explain that he is the real Peter, and the one she married is the fake. MJ doesn't really give a fuck honestly, and just wants some protection from Kaine, and speak of the devil as he's caught up to her. Kaine, of course, is adamant that this man is nothing more than another imposter, but imposter or not, he's still got spider strength. Not much, mind you, but enough to buy MJ time to escape, though not for very long, as both Kaine and the other Parker are hot on her heels. Peter's rotten night in jail only gets worse when Traveler's minion Chakra suddenly appears, informing Peter that Kaine is hunting for Mary Jane. Ben likewise finding out thanks to MJ herself, but she's taking a third path this time instead of waiting for masked superheroes to save her. With his wife in danger, Peter finds no other choice but to break free from prison to rescue her. The consequences be damned, he can't leave her to whatever Kaine is planning for her. Though he's effortlessly able to break free from his cell and out to the shoreline, he's eventually caught by Judas Traveler, warning him not to make that final jump off the island. Peter, understandably, calls out Traveler for this, fully aware he doesn't actually give a fuck about his life beyond his experiments, though Traveler, as always, gives an incredibly unhelpful response. Nonetheless, he does Peter a solid, conjuring a temporary illusion of Peter to fill his place until his wife is safe, with Chakra spiriting him away to the mainland. Traveler stays behind to watch, with Scryer standing watch, questioning his associates' motives. Back at the Parker residence, Mary Jane has the ultimate solution to her current predicament: a gun. Not that it's much help when Spider-Man emerges from the shadows to greet her, but she quickly realizes this isn't her Spidey, but rather the third Parker in his costume. He tries his hardest to convince her otherwise, but MJ ain't buying it and takes a shot. A very poor shot, all things considered, but enough to distract Parker so Kaine can get a sneak attack, nabbing MJ once again to do something. I don't know what, but it's mysterious. Anyways, he contemplates just killing the third Parker to put the audience out of their misery with this plotline, but when he hears the Scarlet Spider entering the apartment, he bails, dragging Mary Jane off to, I don't know, Mole Man's house, I guess, doesn't matter. Scarlet arrives too late, confused to see Peter in the apartment in costume, and so isn't the real Peter, kicking open the door only to be greeted by his two clones. Chapter 3 kicks off from here, and the third Parker is really not handling this all that well. Peter, naturally, ain't interested in playing along with his delusions, and the two begin fighting, but Ben steps in to try his best at being mediator. Peter catches Ben up to speed with his recent journey, but when it comes to filling in the blanks, the third Parker is less than helpful. Peter suits up the best he can, cobbling together a costume with the remnants of the black suit, and heading out to beat down Kaine, leaving Ben to clean up the mess that is the third Parker, who, unsurprisingly, has escaped when the two had their backs turned. After a quick check-in on Mary Jane and Kaine, where Kaine is continuing to be incredibly unhelpful with explaining what his goals are to the woman, even when he has no reason to be so goddamn mysterious and vague to her, Spidey's putting his grand plan into motion. His grand plan of posing dramatically on the rooftops, waiting for MJ to activate a spider tracer to find her. The Scarlet Spider arrives to pose dramatically as well, offering his aid in battle. Like it or not, he has the most experience with Kaine, and considering Spidey's previous bout with the Masked Menace, he kind of needs it. And the other Parker lies in wait, ready to follow. While Kaine lusts over Mary Jane, and who can blame him really, he gets hit with another flash image of her oncoming death, scaring MJ enough to finally activate the tracer and alerting the spiders to her location. About 10 seconds later, MJ has gotten impatient and decides to just run for it aimlessly, buying the spiders time to head underground. Scarlet taking the first wave to give Peter a chance at surviving the Masked Menace's attacks. Not that they get far enough for it to matter, as the third Parker butts in, threatening to kill whoever's taken Mary Jane, busting through the walls and conveniently discovering a secret passage. And good timing too, as she's passing by at that very second with Kaine close behind. Both Kaine and Mary Jane are confused about there now being 3 Spider-Men, but the fight begins before they have any chance to figure out who's who. The third Parker diving in for the kill, as Spidey and Scarlet handle backup while MJ escapes. Spidey gives Kaine his all, but the big Masked Menace no-sells his offense, more interested in figuring out whether he's the real Spidey or yet another imposter. Scarlet reminds Kaine that they're supposed to be arch-enemies though to get his attention, and Spidey takes off, realizing that both MJ and the third Parker have gone on the run. The third Parker catches up to Mary Jane, trying his hardest to convince her he's really for real the true Peter Parker. But Spidey gives him a face full of fist, which seems to be enough to convince Mary Jane he's the real deal, which sends our would-be Spider-Man fully over the edge into madness, screaming like a madman for their blood. And so isn't Kaine, having made short work of the Scarlet Spider and fully ready to move on to the others. Chapter 4 continues the fight with the third Parker in the throes of madness, quite literally twisting into an inhuman monster in rage. Kaine gives some helpful and decidedly not cryptic information, revealing the third Parker to be nothing more than another mad experiment of the Jackal, a biological weapon genetically manufactured with the sole purpose of slaying the real Peter Parker. Kaine chooses to take on this monster himself, telling Peter and MJ to escape, though the Scarlet Spider isn't as beaten as he's led Kaine to believe, striking the Masked Menace while his guard was down to give the two an opening to flee for reals. Kaine puts the Scarlet Spider to good use against the spider monster, who despite his ever-deteriorating visage, continues to insist he's the one true Peter Parker, merely twisted and transformed by Warren's mad science. Ben believes him for but a split second, but quickly abandons that idea, knowing that the real Peter Parker, whoever that may be at present time, would never be willing to commit murder for his own self-preservation. I mean, except all those times Spidey let people die to save himself, but those don't count, I guess. Whatever the case, the Scarlet Spider begrudgingly allies himself with Kaine to take the monster down. After a quick vibe check with Traveler, where Scryer admonishes him for his continued aid of Spider-Man against better judgment, as Traveler's seemingly limitless power begins to wane, he chooses to continue the illusion to give him a chance at improving his life. And we return to Peter and MJ, who are quickly losing ground to the oncoming brawl between Ben, Kaine, and the third Parker, so charitably referred to throughout the issue as Freakface, because Tom DeFalco really wanted that to be his name for some goddamn reason. Kaine tries to live up to his namesake by crushing the clone with a big rock, but that proves ineffective, as the Jackal's given him a special weapon, fully able to morph his body to any shape or size, something he designed just to counter Kaine's particular set of skills. Scarlet's able to free his nemesis, and the two decide to cut their losses for a strategic retreat up to the streets above. Peter and MJ beat them up there, and though he tries to flee with her, MJ knows that one way or the other Peter's going to get involved with the fight, and gives him a nice dose of encouragement before she heads for safety. Getting in a cheap shot as soon as the other combatants head topside via a steel girder to the face, it's 3-on-1 with the Spiders and Kaine against the Jackal's newest abomination. And Spidey's back in full form as the clone monster continues his rampage, insistent to the end that he's the real Peter Parker. Benny Boy, though, has lost focus, more worried on keeping Peter safe than taking care of the threat facing them down. Quite annoying Kaine, who chooses to end the fight in a decisive fashion. Amidst the flames and rubble, our Spiders and Kaine have come out fairly unscathed. Physically, at least, as with this latest threat resolved, Peter's finally letting loose on Ben for his current predicament, accusing him of committing the murders and framing Peter. Ben denies this wholeheartedly and offers Peter a trade. By swapping places with Peter and returning to jail for him, Ben will give Peter the chance to prove his innocence and catch the real killer, or at the very least be able to live with his wife and child-to-be the way he should be. Peter, of course, accepts, and the two part ways, with Ben returning to fill Peter's place in prison, the resolution that Traveler predicted all along. The 5th chapter concludes our story, though the majority of it is superfluous to the events that preceded it. Peter, having temporarily taken up the mantle of Scarlet Spider, is on his way home to finally get some quality time with Mary Jane, despite all their recent headaches. Sadly, he won't get much of a rest. With Kaine still on the loose targeting the Wall Crawler's enemies, Hobgoblin has assembled the various members of the Sinister Six to track down the masked menace and take him down for good. Unfortunately for Peter, he needs Kaine alive more than he does dead, and is forced to once again ally with the monster to stop the Sinister Six's Operation Kaine Kill. Yeah, really. Though there are a few key points to go over. Peter gets tipped off to the scheme by pure accident when he runs into the Beetle on the hunt for Kaine. And though the Beetle is certainly freaked out about how tenacious the Scarlet Spider is pursuing him, it's not a long pursuit. Spidey stopping to take care of collateral damage, then pursue the villain. During the cleanup, Spidey accidentally drops the parts of the black suit he had on him, ending up in the hands of Ken Ellis, who is more than intrigued with the whys and hows of it. Ben, all the while, is trying his best to adjust to prison life, trying to call MJ and check up on her, the call ignored by her and Peter. But he finds himself in a sticky situation when he gets a visitor, and not one he can use preordained knowledge to bluff through. Felicia Hardy is here to check in on her good friend Peter Parker. Surprising no one, Ben fumbles the masquerade. Even with the hint that Felicia knows Peter is Spider-Man, Ben is completely unable to convincingly pretend to be the man he's cloned from, and the Black Cat is all too curious to figure out what's going on. As Kaine, disguised as Spider-Man for basically no good reason whatsoever, launches his assault against the Sinister Six, we see that Detective Raven and Stunner's odd partnership is paying off, getting some much-needed info on Kaine, and as Spidey joins the battle of villainy, Mary Jane gets a call from Dr. Trainer. Her test results from earlier are done, and though he insists there's nothing wrong, he wants to see her in person to discuss the results, which of course never means anything good. Though what said news is, we don't get to hear, but Mary Jane takes it quite hard, panicking as she runs out of Trainer's lab. The Scarlet Spider-Man and Kaine manage to stop the Sinister Six, but a last-second trick by Mysterio sends Kaine into a frenzy. Believing that Peter is the Hobgoblin and he's killed Parker, he tries to murder the monster for vengeance, not fully succeeding as he flees into the night. Though the immediate threat is done, Peter's back at square one with no clue of where Kaine is headed and no idea on how to clear his name. Peter might be done for the night, but not everyone else, as we briefly return to the ruins of the battle in the prior chapter, as Scryer scoops up the remains of the third Parker. Though horrifically degenerated, he still has some use in the ghoul's eyes. And we properly conclude with Felicia busy poring over the recent news to try and find out what's causing Peter to be so odd, getting a lucky break, as Mary Jane has come seeking a friend to share her own crisis. Mark of Kaine is a much better start to the second act than Aftershocks, and though it falters in some areas, it's overall fairly good. The conclusion to the third Parker arc is as predictable as can be. Like I said earlier, it was exceedingly obvious this guy wasn't going to actually be the real Peter Parker, and at this point it had already dragged on far beyond necessary. Concluding his arc by turning him into a big dumb monster is, it's whatever, but at least it's an ending, is what I would say if they didn't foreshadow his return immediately after, though the shape-shifting angle is pretty neat, I'll give him that. Meanwhile, we're getting a better insight into Kaine's motivations, though as we get more of a spotlight on the big oaf, we start to become more aware that he's really not as cunning as he looks and has really just been getting lucky this whole time. And while Peter has begun backsliding into the wangsty edgelord he started the saga off as, it's a little more restrained so far, largely counteracted by Ben continuing to surpass the man he's copied from with his own behavior, acting more and more the selfless hero that spawned him. As for our other villains, Traveler and Scryer continue to be nigh incomprehensible in terms of power level and motive, whereas the return of Stunner in an attempt to actually make her a character has some solid foundation. Having her help clear Peter's name for Otto's sake is a good direction, even if barely utilized so far. Following after Mark of Kaine came Web 125, a standalone story entitled Lives Unlived, featuring yet another irrelevant gimmick cover, sporting a 3D live-action holodisc, whatever the hell that's supposed to be, which allegedly features an image of the Scarlet Spider, but in practice really doesn't look like anything at all. With Ben currently awaiting trial, the Scarlet Man Spider has to handle the triple threat of the Jackal, Kaine, and his own murder conviction all by himself. but a late-night trip to the Bugle archives proves promising, discovering that Professor Warren was quite active during the last 5 years despite his genetic restructuring, hitching a train down to Jersey to figure out what the doc's been up to. Though he's not totally alone, as someone else in the Bugle offices catches wind of what Peter's been up to. It's a surprisingly uneventful trip down south, as Spidey makes it down to Warren's cozy suburban hideaway in a scant few hours. Unsurprisingly, there's more to the place than meets the eye, as Warren's hiding a secret lab in the home kitted out with the best security a supervillain can buy. The wall crawler manages to get inside, but finds it to be a more than normal home. Cozy and lived in, as Warren has seemingly settled down with a nice wife, all of which sending him down memory lane to his life with Aunt May. That is until he gets caught by said wife, who, of course, is Gwen Stacy, once again crossing the spider's path. Peter unmasks to try and calm Gwen down, but only gets a face full of broom and a taser to the back, courtesy of Professor Warren, for his good measure. After a quick check-in with Felicia and Mary Jane, where MJ reveals that Peter's radioactive spider blood poses a potential hazard to the baby, and now that she's fully caught up to the ongoing shenanigans, it's time for the Black Cat to set out and make things right. We cut back sometime later, with Warren and Gwen on the run as Peter wakes up in their house. Peter, having for some fucking reason forgot Gwen was cloned twice already, isn't really sure of what's going on between the two, and while Warren infodumps his own backstory, Peter tears through the house for more info on the situation. Warren reveals his tragic backstory, how his once promising life with a beautiful wife and children fell apart due to his own obsession, their tragic deaths leaving an empty void in his life until he met Gwen, and how he managed to seduce her to finally be his and his alone. Peter, meanwhile, finds that the Jackal built quite an elaborate life for his little clones, eventually stumbling upon hidden records left by Warren. Both the notes and Gwen simultaneously reveal the truth. This Warren, unsurprisingly, is a clone, the real one created to keep watch over Gwen. And this Gwen is the original Gwen clone from the original saga, the one we were led to believe was an ordinary woman named Joyce Delaney, but via reasons unknown had her previous identity as Gwen returned to her. Warren had been manipulating Gwen, telling her half-truths about her life and Spider-Man's involvement therein, keeping their lives on the move to prevent their pasts, or more accurately, anyone properly in the know, from catching up to them. Peter, meanwhile, gets lost in Warren's notes, finding out he's come close to perfecting a cure to clone degeneration. But remembering the madman is still on the loose with Gwen, he rushes out after them, a luckily hidden spider tracer guiding him. Spidey catches up quick, and Warren takes drastic measures, causing a massive traffic pileup as he guns for the toll gate of what we're told is the Washington Bridge, but is very clearly the Brooklyn Bridge. Again, how the fuck do you make this mistake, Marvel? As Spidey hangs back to clean up the wreck, the Clone Mobile's engine detonates, sending it careening off the side of the bridge, quickly threatening to plummet into the waters below. As Warren struggles for his glove box rather than his own safety, Gwen is rescued from the ever-deteriorating wreck by the most unlikely ally of all. No, seriously, like never in a million years would you guess it. You're gonna think I'm fucking with you when I say it. Shit, I barely even believe it myself. I've read the fucking Clone Saga like 5 times now, and I still can't believe what happens. I have the pages right in front of me, and I don't believe who it is. But no, I'm not psyching up a fake out. This is genuinely, actually what happens. So just stick with me, all right? So the fucking Green Goblin swoops in to rescue Gwen. Seriously, the Green Goblin, well known for saving people from dying, as we all know. The Goblin, now stop me if you heard this one before, carries Gwen Stacy up to the top of the bridge, and in a state of shock and panic, she is tossed from the side and plummets to the icy water below. Granted, it's not the Goblin's fault this time, as Warren's shitty aim has spooked both Gobby and Gwen. The Goblin flies off to parts unknown, and as is obligatory, Peter once more leaps after Gwen to stop her fall. Fortunately, this time he remembers grade school physics lessons, swooping in from a side and swinging her to safety, successfully keeping a third dead Gwen Stacy off his permanent record. Not that he has a flawless night, as Warren's clone takes a headfirst drop into the waters below, dying on impact and his body rapidly degenerating. As Gwen's clone runs off into the cold night, the long-hidden memories of her true nature resurfacing, Peter is left to contemplate himself, not just of Gwen and Warren, but of the Green Goblin's return, the biggest enigma of all. Though Peter doesn't get an answer, we do, as we learn that this new Goblin is the same man who caught Spidey in the Bugle, having believed Spidey to be his currently unidentified uncle. And whoever he is, he's seeking to use the Goblin's powers for the sake of good. Not that he was very successful at it. The issue also has a backup story, where we find out the motive behind the make-believe life with Warren's clone, a sick, twisted idea to keep his legacy alive beyond his death, and the life the two shared in the time since the Evolutionary War. A largely fictitious life, orchestrated from the shadows by the Jackal, all for Gwen's sake, though seemingly a happy life for her, even if it is creepy as fuck. In terms of bringing the Gwen clone back into the fold, a not entirely necessary decision at this stage of the story, there's definitely worse ways to have done it, but this isn't really the time nor the right place to do it. While Warren keeping her under watch makes sense with his character, the entire setup for the bizarre fantasy he inserted Gwen into relies on a series of contrivances to get them to this position, most major of which being the handling of undoing the Evolutionary War retcon. While I understand the need to resolve that, it should have been done much earlier in the saga, and now ends up being a really inconvenient time with everything else piling up, and Gwen has no real role in the story right now to warrant being here. Plus, with the introduction of a separate Warren clone to pair up with Gwen, raises some logistical issues with the Jackal's whole operation. Seems like he was just begging for it to fall apart on him. The issue itself, divorced from the context, is fine. The art's not remarkable and the chase sequence is exciting, but all the exposition coming in one big dump is exhaustive, and the redooming of Gwen's death is a cheap bit of pandering. Though, compared to most other instances, I guess this is one of the only times it makes sense in context. And, of course, the elephant in the room that is the new Green Goblin debuting, which comes completely out of nowhere and is most certainly not something we needed to be dealing with at this time. But at the bare minimum, it's clear the Spider Office already has an idea for the who's and what's of the new Goblin, with a few clues to his identity that an astute fanboy can figure out, and the twist of making him a hero, even if ineffectual, sets up for a nice dynamic with the spiders. We'll just have to see if they stick the landing. I do also like the redesigned costume. Keeping much of the original design with some aesthetic alterations makes for a good alternate look, making it clear that this is still the Green Goblin, but a distinctly different one than we remember. And the simplified glider has a nice sleek look to it. But we won't get a follow-up on either of these plot points just yet, as we move on to our next story arc, Crossfire. No, not that one! Peter's making some progress in his quest for the mystery killer who framed him, finding out from Detective Raven that the real culprit is our old pal Kaine. But unfortunately for our friendly neighborhood gumshoe, this night will be particularly painful, as Judas Traveler has once again set his sights on the hero. And it seems whatever he's got planned is far too much for Scryer to handle, pleading to Traveler enigmatic mystery to put an end to his scheme now before it goes too far, his words falling on deaf ears. Peter returns home, finding Mary Jane waiting for him, and none too happy for his outing, laying into her husband and venting her many frustrations over the last months, worried for his safety and their family's stability throughout all the strife they've endured. Though Peter does his best to console his loving wife, it's not easy. The mood worsened when Mary Jane hands him the lab reports from Dr. Traynor, telling them that Peter's radioactive spider blood may result in their child to be becoming severely deformed. Though Peter stays optimistic, MJ is far less so, panicking and lashing out at her husband, blaming it all on him. While she quickly regrets her words and tries to apologize, she doesn't quite get the chance to patch things up. Traveler has arrived to issue his latest challenge to the Wallcrawler. Traveler feeds our hero another lofty monologue about his goals, about darkness and light and the nature of the soul and how human madness transfixes around Spider-Man and all the same shit he always talks about, but Spidey's tired of reruns and would rather settle things the old-fashioned way. Sadly, Traveler doesn't want to play along, torturing our hero with visions of madness and pain, but a sample of all the evils he's seen in his life, tormenting Spider-Man with a brutal onslaught of mental attacks and questioning his own heroic soul at its core. To that end, the enigmatic lunatic issues Spider-Man his latest challenge, presenting to him Aunt May's very soul, captured from the world beyond and offered as the prize of the day's game, telling our hero that he can bring Aunt May back to life, and all he asks in exchange is to sacrifice the life of another, a nameless, insignificant bystander the world won't miss. Unsurprisingly, Spidey calls his bluff, realizing that while Traveler's powers are immense, they're nothing more than tricks played on his mind, beating back the Conjurer and ending his little game before it begins. Humbled, Traveler admits to his deception, but the game isn't over yet, as they return not to Peter's cozy apartment, but to 24 hours in the future, looking over the desolated ruins of New York, with Traveler proclaiming the devastation is the handiwork of Spider-Man himself. Chapter 2 picks up amidst the ruins of New York, Spidey escaping his mystery foe to survey the destruction, his first and foremost goal being ensuring Mary Jane is safe. And though she is, Traveler's not letting him off the hook that easily. returning them both to the present and explaining that the destruction of the city is his fault, and its downfall comes from choosing to spare Mary Jane's life in exchange for New York itself. After a brief check-in with Detective Raven, confronting his associate Detective Trevane and asking him for help proving Peter's innocence, Spidey tries bowing out of Traveler's game once more, but he's playing whether he likes it or not. Traveler gives the webhead the score. His minions, the Host, are off rigging the local geothermal plant to explode, which will wipe out the city and bring about the future we saw. Though he promises Mary Jane and their baby will survive thanks to his influence, it's up to Spider-Man to make the next move. Stay home and do nothing, letting the city be destroyed but ensuring the peaceful family life he wants, or risk his life to stop the Host and potentially die in the process. As Spidey heads inside to say his potentially final goodbye to his wife, Scarlet again arrives to try and dissuade Traveler from overexerting his poorly defined powers for his game, but he gets a less than friendly response for his measures. Peter and MJ say their farewells, finally apologizing after their argument earlier, and our hero swings off to once again save the day, perhaps for the final time. The trip is quick and the action quicker, Spidey fighting off the Host all at once, managing to redirect himself towards his intended goal, knocking out Chakra and stopping her from overloading the plant. Sadly, this only makes things worse, as stopping her has resulted in time going screwy, tearing open a rift in time and threatening to create a wave of destruction far beyond what they intended. This is significantly beyond what Traveler had planned for, earning him an "I told you so" from Scrier as Spidey returns. Scrier gives Spider-Man the play-by-play for the cosmic shenanigans, explaining that Traveler's recent meddlings have fractured time and are seeking to consume him, and when fully consumed, New York will go with him, much as our friendly neighborhood clairvoyant saw. Scrier's being petty and sitting this one off, and he suggests Spidey do the same, Traveler's field of protection still guarding the Parker residence. But as Traveler plunges deeper into the rift, blasted with memories spanning history and the world, scenes of pain and agony, all featuring a man with some peculiar hair, Spidey dives in to rescue the Conjurer, blasted with the same memories that Traveler saw, and manages to wrest him free from the rift, which slowly fades away with no ill effect. Neither Traveler nor Scrier can understand why he risked his life for a man who so thoroughly ruined his life just to sate his own curiosity, but Peter gives him the expected answer. Enemy or not, it's the right thing to do, and if Traveler still can't understand Spider-Man after that, then he'll just have to keep trying. Crossfire is kinda bad, honestly. Once again, it's almost entirely irrelevant to the greater scope of the saga, and is far too high concept for Spider-Man to be dealing with, at least in this current context. All this talk of time travel and souls and human nature and whatnot feel like one prolonged non sequitur that doesn't really accomplish much of anything. We don't really learn anything new, whether it be the ongoing story or Spider-Man as a character, and Traveler is only further muddled with his goals. His powers have far exceeded the levels our hero is equipped to deal with on a regular basis. His motives are becoming increasingly convoluted, and the drip feeding of a backstory aren't really all that interesting, along with his host still being fairly generic. It also fails to capitalize on the story set up with the other two issues that month with the return of the Green Goblin, leaving this two-parter as little more than a distraction, and one that I'm sure I can confidently say won't come back up again. But this month concludes in SSM 225, continuing the introduction of our newest Goblin, and he's not alone, as there's another new, and quite inflammatory, villain in town. Though Peter's confident that Harry hasn't plotted another scheme from beyond the grave, at least for now, he's more concerned with clearing his name. But there's someone more interested in figuring out the new Goblin's identity, the Jackal, who's quite upset that someone ruined the little fantasy set piece he had built for Gwen and himself, and has set his sights on this new Goblin to figure out who's behind the glider. And while the Bugle is burning down, as usual, between a recent arsonist spree and the Parker trial, it's more business than usual for old Ben Urich, more concerned with the whereabouts of his lazy delinquent nephew, who's also his new intern. Peter returns home where MJ's waiting for him, and with a fresh new spider suit for good measure. And she's once again not too happy that Peter's been out risking his life without a break, still focusing too much on the spider and not the man, or the man's family. But this next bout of marital strife gets put on pause when plot convenience news tips off our hero to another murder by the mystery arsonist, and back in his traditional gear, he's off to work once more. And he's not the only one. While the Jackal watches him swing off, our new Goblin has suited up and is about to hit the town, and his first target is his most dastardly, some random homeless guy. Luckily, Spider-Man happened to arrive just in time to stop the Goblin from just standing there as he planned, flinging the Goblin off and sending him running. Their fight interrupting a local eatery, the Goblin tries to get Spidey to leave him him alone, swearing he's fighting on the side of good. But naturally, Spider-Man isn't so quick to believe that, considering he caught him bomb-primed stalking a homeless guy when there's someone running around burning hobos to death. Of course, while our two costume credits engage in misunderstandings theater, the would-be target is about to befall the same fate as the others, catching the bad end of the villain, Fire Fist. No, not that one. But not for very long, as Spidey and the goblins fight, observed from afar by the Jackal, too curious to see the outcome despite his critical work and play, crosses paths with the mad villain, preaching to his latest victim about how by indiscriminately burning hobos to death will make America great again. After a quick check-in with Mary Jane, visiting Ben in prison, trying to get some advice about what to do, the fight kicks off, the Goblin saving Fire Fist's victim, while Spidey engages with this lunatic, surprised that the Goblin isn't the killer on the loose, as far as he knows, trying to keep from becoming Crispy Fried Spider. With the victim safe, the Goblin considers just bailing and quitting the whole cape game as a whole, but with Spidey on the ropes and the forgettable freak about to land the killing blow, he swoops back in for a second round, saving the Jackal from having to get off his ass and do something for once, sneaking out while he has the chance. After another quick check-in at the Bugle, Spidey's able to recover thanks to the Goblin's interference, and takes out Fire Fist with a single punch. Amazed, terrified, and embarrassed, our new Goblin bails, bemoaning his poor performance and considering that maybe he's not cut out to be a hero after all. With Fire Fist dispatched and the new Goblin missing, Spidey swings off back home to finally have a serious chat with Mary Jane about their futures. And he's not the only one, as the Jackal returns to his lab, where he's got a surprising visitor. Our shape-shifting clone friend is back in action. This issue also has a backup story, one not too important, but a fun read, featuring Ben Urich interviewing some of Peter's closest friends and family to try and piece together his life story and figure out an angle to his so-called murders. It largely consists of recaps of classic Lee Ditko-era Spider-Man stories from the perspective of the regular sidecast, commenting on Peter's life from childhood through high school, how he went from being the shut-in coward he started as and became the man he is now. There's not much to it, but it's a good read. It really gets to the root of the character in a very interesting way, with plenty of meta gags about his secret identity along the way. Though our choice of villain is immediately forgettable, this is another really strong story, and again, makes me wish they had done a 4-parter about the new Goblin instead of splitting the story. We're actually moving the saga forward, not just with the return of the Jackal and the third Parker clone, but learning more about this new Goblin. I like the way he and Spidey play off of each other. Spider-Man unable to tell if his incompetence is genuine or another padded-in scheme by the Goblin, and it builds to an interesting dynamic. The new Goblin is likewise built well, made very clear he's way out of his league in the hero game, even if his totally radical dialogue is revolting. The main villain of the story, who I've already forgotten the name of, is bland as hell, but fills his role as a subversion well, and had a low enough threat level to be a good first showing for the Goblin. The soap opera drama with MJ and the baby is beginning to get repetitive though, and I know we won't be done with it anytime soon. You'll notice, of course, that we still do not know who the new Green Goblin is. Though there are some clear hints here, and using the hints gathered earlier, you can guess his identity, we still don't know for sure. And in fact, we will continue not to know, as his identity won't be revealed in the Spider books. The new Goblin wouldn't be unmasked until about 4 months later, in the debut issue of his own solo series. The Green Goblin would be revealed as the previously unmentioned Phil Urich, Ben Urich's nephew. Exactly as lazy and dim-witted as we assume, Phil became the Green Goblin largely by coincidence. Following a lengthy series of events while acting as his uncle's intern, Phil would inadvertently stumble upon one of the Green Goblin's many labs spread across the city. When a group of criminals sets their sights on the lab, and their raid threatening the life of his Uncle Ben, hey wait a minute, Phil would end up donning the mantle of the Green Goblin, mostly on impulse, having accidentally doused himself with the Goblin serum and taking a new, more advanced set of Goblin gear left behind by Harry. Somewhat ignorant of the legacy of evil the name carries, Phil would keep the gear, donning the mantle of Green Goblin not for mischief, but in the name of justice. Now, we won't see the Green Goblin again for a little while, and his solo book is largely irrelevant to the Clone Saga. While we'll stop in a few times going forward, it's hardly a necessary read in full. And now, true believers, it's time for the conclusion of the Clone Saga's second arc and the finale of Act 1, the trial of Peter Parker. True to its name, the long-dreaded trial has finally commenced, and with it comes the final fate of Peter Parker, or perhaps Ben Reilly, the man currently in the courtroom. Spider-Man, meanwhile, is hot on the trail of, scratch that, engaged in heated battle with Kaine, looking to apprehend the masked marauder and not just exonerate his own name, but finally figure out just what his foe's deal is. Kaine, for his part, is less than enthusiastic to help, even though his incredibly vague scheme of fucking over Ben and protecting Peter's life has itself fucked over Peter too, and is very uncooperative with Spidey's requests for a last-second interrogation, becoming increasingly delusional over Peter. While the trial goes on, Detective Raven and Stunner are watching from outside, eagerly awaiting Kaine under the assumption he'll want to gloat over the trial, only called away when a police report tips them off to the two's battle. As the defense begins its incredibly boring introduction, Kaine knocks down Spidey, but comes face to face with his greatest foe yet, a regular cop with a gun. He puts up a valiant effort, though not enough to win, but enough to give Spidey his second wind, cutting loose on Kaine and effortlessly subduing his target, at least until the beatdown is preempted by Stunner and Raven, Stunner declaring her intent to slay Kaine then and now. But as the trial throws its first major shock at Ben, with the first witness called to the stand being Mary Jane, the fighters get their own surprise when Judas Traveler pops in unexpectedly, rescuing Kaine and Spidey from Stunner's approach. Chapter 2 shows us where he's taken Spidey. To court. But not the court he should be at, but instead a court of the damned in the depths of a Ravencroft, with Traveler's judgment of Spider-Man's soul on the bench for the day, Carnage at lead in prosecution, and a jury of his many foes, with Kaine his only defense as his defense attorney. Traveler proclaims that his research leads him to believe that it is Spider-Man's very nature that causes the birth of villainy, and this trial is set to prove whether or not it's true. Traveler calls on Spider-Man for his plea, but Spidey's not talking. Not by choice, mind you, as Traveler's frozen him solid with his powers. Kaine, however, answers for his client in his expected manner, calling him a puppet of their mutual acquaintance Scryer. Kaine admonishes the Conjurer for daring to even consider questioning the heroic valor of Spider-Man, calling to dismiss the trial by slaying Traveler once and for all. But Traveler no-sells the mark of Kaine and quickly puts Kaine in his place, more irritated at being called a puppet of Scryer than he was at the attempted murder. With the trial of the damned forced to proceed, Carnage throwing himself on the stand as a witness, we return to the Parker trial with its own red-colored witness in Mary Jane. She does her best to stand up to the prosecution's questions, but falters when it comes to explain where her dear husband was during the time of the murders occurred. It's here we find out the time of the murders coincided with the events of Kraven's last hunt, specifically the 2-week period wherein Spidey was buried alive by the Hunter, and while that spares us from some ridiculous last-second swerve, it puts Mary Jane in a difficult position. As well as she knows where her husband was, she can't say it without revealing his identity, and ultimately submits to the prosecution. Back at Ravencroft, Carnage begins to cry wolf over how Spider-Man is a big dumb meanie who's responsible for him becoming a killer, Kaine too subdued by another premonition of MJ's death to intervene. Kaine, however, snaps back to form and cross-examines Carnage by trying to just fucking murder him until Traveler objects, scaring Carnage into submission and bringing the next witness up, our old pal Malcolm McBride. Carnage forces McBride to once more recount the scenario that led to him becoming Carrion, blaming Peter Parker by name for spurring him on to the events that unfolded. And with the accusation, Carnage swiftly unmasks Spidey, tauntingly furthering the accusation by dredging up each and every innocent bystander killed by Peter's life as Spider-Man. This enrages Spidey enough to break free from Traveler's paralysis and quickly calls foul on the kangaroo court he's been subjected to, telling the mad conjurer that he's sick of the mind games. If he wants to destroy his life, then he should just do it already. And all he asks is to be allowed to bring in Kaine to save Ben. Traveler is impressed, but not enough to call off the trial, his jury of the damned unanimously finding Peter guilty as charged. Using his powers to forcibly transform McBride and Wayland back into Carrion and Vermin, the jury leaps to declare the sentence, that being death. As we return to a furious Stunner bemoaning the near capture of Kaine, Raven's attempts to calm her down cut short by her sudden and miraculous disappearance, much like before. Spidey's execution commences, but Kaine has taken his role of defense attorney rather literally, praising Peter Parker as the man he always hoped to be, fighting the inmates 100-1 to sacrifice his life so that Spider-Man may live. A sacrifice he nearly makes, until Traveler steps in to put the inmates back into their cells. Once again, this was all according to Traveler's Keikaku, wanting to figure out what's driven Kaine so strongly to fixate on Peter Parker against his very nature. To understand that would help him understand why Spider-Man intervened in the time vortex mishap earlier. His curiosity sated, Traveler returns Spider-Man back to where he found him, an unconscious Kaine in tow as his gift. Unfortunately, Stunner happened to be waiting right nearby, and she's not about to waste time getting what she wants. And Traveler fucks off himself, his investigation closed for the time being, though he almost forgets one crucial detail, quickly stopping in on Carnage to wipe his memories of the whole affair, and making this entire thing a gigantic waste of all our time. Chapter 3 finds Kaine up against the wall, literally, with Stunner ready to strike, Spider-Man not doing much to stop her from trying. But he is able to stop Kaine from branding her with his mark, and the two are fast on the run, Stunner bringing the fight to a nearby construction site as they continue to play defense. The fight gets cut short, however, when her rampaging brings the building down around them, Spidey only just barely surviving thanks to Kaine, and Stunner not so lucky. Spidey is naturally pissed and quickly dives into the rubble to dig out Stunner, but as she vanishes once more, he's left only with another mystery. But he has a bigger mystery to solve, quickly catching Kaine, who's slowly escaping from the scene of the crime. Kaine remains defiant despite his admiration of Spider-Man, steadfastly refusing to help save Reilly and fully intended to fight to his last of his strength to keep the wall crawler from bringing him in. Spidey agrees that even as he is, he's not strong enough to take down Kaine in a straight-on duel. But the two said nothing about sneak attacks, and the masked marauder is down cold. Spidey's carried Kaine to the courthouse, and with not a moment to spare, as the prosecution is calling to have Parker put to death for the murders he's accused of. Spidey intends to do this the old-fashioned way, marching in triumphantly and tossing Kaine to the judge, but Kaine wakes up and he's got other plans, breaking free and continuing their battle in the courthouse itself. Though in some small blessings, this puts the trial on pause while the costume brawl goes on, the two foes barreling through the courthouse as they debate the suffering their lives face. But Kaine does something different. He gives up the fight, and gives our friendly neighborhood private detective a chance to learn the truth, cryptically explaining that despite all expectations, he's not just some costumed thug like all the other supervillains he's faced. Spidey doesn't buy it at first, but Kaine, in his usual way, tells our hero that everything he's ever done has only ever been to help his life, and he has never had any ill intent in causing the mischief that's currently enveloped the name of Peter Parker. And he's sunk too much time into this that he refuses to let Spider-Man throw it all away, especially not to help Ben Reilly. But he understands that Spider-Man still can't understand why Kaine does what he does. And so, he dramatically unmasks himself. The mystery is finally solved, and Kaine is revealed to be yet another Spider clone! For those of you keeping track at home, this makes this the 6th fucking version of Peter Parker we've dealt with since the start of the saga. But Kaine isn't just any Spider clone, as he explains, he was the very first. Warren's original prototype for the cloning process. Though successfully formed, his degeneration kicked in and he was disposed of, but not permanently, and he's continued to live on in the shadows these many years. His hatred of Warren and the other clones, and his admiration of the one true Peter Parker, has driven him to his actions over the years, having dedicated what remains of his life to strike from the shadows and protect Parker's life from anything that threatens it in any way necessary. And this includes framing Ben for murder. Spider-Man offers a hand of pity to the man who would be Peter Parker, but it's rebuked. Kaine's still adamant in his refusal to help Reilly, the ultimate threat to the safety of Parker's life. Spidey instead confronts his twisted clone, saying that if everything he believes is true, then he should be helping Ben regardless of it all. And with one last refusal, he's given an ultimatum. Either Kaine turns himself in to save Ben, or Spidey will march into the courtroom alone and unmask himself to set the truth free. Kaine tries in vain to stop the web-slinger, but to no avail, as they invade the trial. And mere moments from making the last step to revealing his identity, Kaine eventually folds, giving in to Spider-Man's demands. Though in his usual fashion, Kaine confesses to the judge for the murders committed, spinning a cover story that he despised Peter Parker for having caught him in the act of murder once before, getting his fingerprints surgically altered to match Peter and framing him for it. Which is, it's pretty fucking dumb, but in the grand scheme of the Marvel Universe, I'm willing to roll with it. Anyways, Kaine leaves his mark on the prosecution bench and states that he's giving up. The police move to apprehend Kaine, but this of course was a last-second bait and switch, taking the moment for one last attempt at murdering Ben. The reveal of Kaine being another clone is, while at this point horrifically wasted, is actually an effective twist for the villain. And it's quite well foreshadowed too. If you pay close attention to Kaine's MO and the scope of knowledge he has, him being another clone makes it all check out. To date, everyone he's killed has either been a direct threat to the Parkers, or otherwise a criminal, and he doesn't kill indiscriminately. His hatred of Ben specifically hasn't really been fully elaborated on, and for that matter, it's not yet clear if Ben knows, but makes sense with the context of his motive. And even his weird fixation on Mary Jane fits together with him being a Parker clone. Plus, if you consider his power set, they all line up with Spider-Man's to an extent. With the genetic deformation he's undergone, his powers have advanced significantly. His strength, agility, and endurance all fall in line with Spidey's. His precognition is just a turbocharged spider sense, with the only outlier being his mark of Kaine, though one you can easily rationalize as a weaponized version of his wall-crawling ability, and indeed this is the intended explanation for this power by the writers. While it's not entirely clear when Kaine's identity was decided on, Greenberg claims Kaine's identity was decided on from the start, but there are a few inconsistencies across his appearances until the Jackal returns. He is easily the strongest new character introduced during the saga, and it's no wonder he became a fan favorite. And I'm not just saying that because I really like him. Whatever the case, in our final chapter, Kaine presses his guilt upon the court by trying to paint the court hall with Peter's, or rather Ben's, blood. Spidey badgers the witness while Ben tries to bail, only kept from joining in thanks to MJ, but luckily he won't need to, as Detective Raven gets Kaine at gunpoint while he's down for the count. Choosing his bets carefully, Kaine folds and allows himself to be arrested, for now at least, while Peter congratulates Spider-Man for clearing his name. And the news spreads around town for all to hear, with the Bugle erupting in cheer at the news of Peter's exoneration, and even Jonah gets a bit jolly at the news. But not everyone is so happy, with the Jackal and his clone cohort fuming in secrecy. As Kaine delivers his confession to the police for the many murders he's committed, the almost callous indifference he addresses the death of Raven's partner sickening him as he recalls the time he's put into catching the man. But the Parkers are back home, and are all set to celebrate their hard-fought victory against the legal system, and give Ben a chance to finally figure out what he's going to do with his life. But it can never be so simple for them. As the party is interrupted by Dr. Trainer, he's just discovered some startling news regarding the Parkers, and demands they head to his lab immediately. And as Kaine is carted off to prison, another precognitive flash of Mary Jane striking him, a much stronger one than before as now he can see who causes her death, the Parkers arrive at the lab. While Dr. Trainer and Peter exchange pleasantries, Peter finding the man all too suspicious for his liking, Mary Jane is quite eager to hear the news. And there is some good news, as Trainer's diagnosis reveals their child is perfectly safe and healthy, but it's not all good news. Quite serious revelations have come up, it appears, and Trainer's tests have led him to only one possibility, that one of the child's parents is, in actuality, a clone. While Peter is furious, Ben is more level-headed, suggesting that the Jackal could have been telling the truth earlier, but Trainer won't know for sure until he's tested Peter's DNA directly. While Peter tries to bail, his distrust of Trainer already high, Mary Jane is able to sway him to stay for the tests for the sake of their family, and Trainer himself suggests that Ben and Peter perform the tests themselves to ensure their accuracy. Peter reluctantly agrees, and the two Parkers delve deep into research, spending untold amounts of time poring over their many tests and their results for a final conclusive verdict. And no matter how many times they run it, no matter how many tests they make, no matter how much they try to run the math, they inevitably keep reaching the conclusion that no one at all could have expected. Peter truly was the clone all along, and Ben Reilly was in fact the original Spider-Man. Peter doesn't take it very well, to put it mildly. The two Parkers tear up Trainer's lab, Peter furiously demanding that the tests were rigged and Trainer was in on it, and Ben finally getting fed up with Peter's whining and forcing him to see reality. But Peter gets the upper hand, putting Ben in a chokehold and fully intending to kill him if he doesn't admit he's tricking him. Mary Jane runs in from the sideline and tries to get Peter to calm down, but in his rage, he backhands her, sending her crashing into the lab equipment. Quickly regaining his senses, Peter can't believe what he's done, diving out the window and fleeing into the night. Now, I want to take a second and talk about this scene. A Marvel hero, in a time of high stress and emotional duress, is comforted by his wife, only to strike her in a fit of blind rage, once-in-a-lifetime event he's never done again. This is, almost exactly, the same set of circumstances that led to Hank Pym's world-infamous slap of Janet dying. So why has Hank been universally branded a wife-beater while hardly anyone, if at all, mentions Spidey doing the same? Well, I actually have a couple of reasons for that. Namely, I think it's the circumstances in which the event happened. In Hank's case, the entirety of Avengers 2:13 focused on his ever-worsening mental state, with the infamous event being the climax to not just the book's arc, but was a pivotal moment in both Hank and Janet's characters. In Peter's case, it's essentially a throwaway scene in the final page in the final issue of an already jam-packed part of the Clone Saga, one that doesn't get any elaboration on in the issue itself. I think the circumstances of their reactions also play into it, where Peter is deeply horrified by his actions and immediately flees in panic terror, unable to comprehend what he's done, whereas Hank's reaction was more along the lines of,
I'm gonna go build my own theme park with blackjack and hookers. In fact, forget the park!
Lastly, it largely gets chalked up to, and to all the Hank Pym fans watching, I hate to say it like this, but there really isn't all that much to talk about with Hank. Don't get me wrong, he's a great character with plenty of great stories under his belt before and after this event, but in terms of stories where he's the pivotal focus, the pickings are rather slim, at least in regards to a casual audience. It really ultimately comes down to the fact that Peter has far more to talk about in regards to his character, good or bad. And with the context considered, I think it's just a low-scale moment of crazy in the Clone Saga overall that most people just don't want to talk about it. Don't get me wrong, I don't think it's at all fair Hank's been stuck with the wife-beater stick for his entire career, nor do I think that we need to reverse course and start calling Peter one non-stop. Lord knows he's got enough shit ruining his character in the modern day as is, but it goes a long way in understanding why it's such a non-issue for Spider-Man to do it. But with the Parkers all in strife, and the Clone Saga only getting worse, the story comes to a close with the Jackal finally ready to enact his master plan for the world, sending out his clone cohort to get one last piece of equipment he needs for his scheme, and giving him a fresh new look for his efforts too. And with all that, the trial of Peter Parker concludes, and with it, Act 1 of the Clone Saga. As a conclusion, it has a bit of a slow start, building up to the confrontation with Kaine, but once it starts going, it goes fast. I've already said my piece on Kaine, and I still stand by it, but I do like how he's not quite done yet. The subplot with Stunner and Raven proved to be futile, ultimately, as we still don't know anything about Stunner as a character to understand her motives or abilities, and with Kaine apprehended, her role is effectively resolved, making any future reveal a waste of our time. Not that she's been a particularly engaging foe up to now, as is. The actual trial is good, but too fast-paced, and I felt like despite how much time we've built up to it, the actual trial getting such a little screen time was a bit of a waste. Though at the same time, I'd rather the courtroom drama not get dragged out over a dozen issues. But the main draw here, of course, is the big reveal at the end, the shocking twist that Ben Reilly was the real Peter Parker all along. This is, of course, a massive bombshell of a twist, one that you may have anticipated but not thought would actually happen. And in many ways, you're right. The plan always was to reveal Ben as the real Spider-Man as part of the saga's story, but never so definitively. When the saga was pitched, the idea, according to the staff, was to lead the audience to think Ben was the real one to replace Peter temporarily, much akin to DC's shakeups, but not permanently. But with the scope of the saga expanding beyond intent, that plan changed, and now Ben being the real Spider-Man was a permanent change with little room for ambiguity in the text. This largely owes to editorial losing their goddamned minds and writing with no real plan of action, but I can't blame them entirely. Over the years, Tom DeFalco has repeatedly insisted that the writers plan a backdoor into the narrative, a get-out-of-jail-free card to quickly course-correct should audience opinions sour. The problem is, DeFalco was no longer in charge of the Spider offices by this point, and more importantly, never told anyone what the backdoor should be, at least according to other writers, resulting in a somewhat sloppy revelation with no clear avenue to escape. Then head of the Spider offices, Bob Budiansky, had no such plan of action and was not nearly as confident in the reveal as the other members of the staff, fully expecting audience reaction to be sour, but having come in late, he had no real way to course-correct the story at that point, and reluctantly sent it off. And, predictably, readers were pissed the fuck off by it. And with both perspectives, it's hard not to see why they were mad. Despite audience response to Ben being incredibly strong, after all, as has been made abundantly clear throughout Act 1, he's more Spider-Man than the real Spider-Man was at this point, it's still a big change to adjust to. Ben had been gone for about 19 years by the time he showed up, and that's a whole 19 years worth of stories to go through with a different Spider-Man. The amount of people who'd been born, started reading Spider-Man, and were continuing to read Spider-Man, or even people who had started after the original saga, were an innumerable part of the audience. These people had spent their entire lives reading the Spider-Man comics, and to them, there was only one Peter Parker. So to come along and tell them that all of that was a lie, the man they thought was Spider-Man was an imposter, and they'd wasted their entire lives reading stories that in their eyes no longer mattered because they weren't the real Spider-Man doing it, the outrage isn't just expected, it's demanded at this point. But from Marvel's perspective, why wouldn't they make Ben the real Spider-Man? Like I said, he's everything the real Spider-Man should be, and more so. It's only natural that he should take over, and the sales justified it. And that's something to keep in mind. The saga was still selling like crazy. Even this outrage didn't impact sales significantly enough for Marvel to panic, and why bother changing their minds? Not that the instinct to course correct didn't occur initially, but by that point Marvel had wrote themselves into a corner and couldn't easily flip a switch a few weeks later to set things back to how they once were. And that's really Act 1 as a whole. It's a strong foundation that sets the stage for the saga well, and in its first half keeps holding up, but it's not as strong as anticipated. The cracks are already beginning to form, and the designers are quickly progressing beyond the scope they aimed for. but it's no wonder it had the reception it did out of the gate. It shows incredible promise and does manage to hook the reader with the intriguing setup. While it might not all be entirely vital, it's not quite wasting time yet either. But we're still not finished with everything we have on offer. The Jackal is still on the loose, we have many mysteries left to solve, and only time will tell if Ben really will stay the one true Spider-Man or not. That's for another time, of course. For now, we're going to take a break from the saga and check back in later down the line. But next time, we'll face the consequences of Marvel's actions, and hopefully pull ourselves out of the pit they're digging for us. Thank you all very much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.